Good evening. Welcome to Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for June 26, 2025. At this time, I would like to call the meeting to order. The commissioners who are present for this evening's meeting are at City Hall. You may have another commissioner join us later on Zoom. We also have staff from the City Attorney's Office and the City Clerk's Office, as well as the City Planning Department. If you're joining us on Zoom this evening, we can see that you are here. You may observe the meeting, however, your ability to be seen on screen and talk will be muted. During the public testimony portion of the meeting, you'll be unmuted and then be able to comment. Please note that we cannot take questions until the public testimony portion of the meeting. If you have a process question during the meeting, please email cityclerk@meridiancity.org and they will reply as quickly as possible. If you simply would like to watch the meeting, we encourage you to watch this streaming on the city's YouTube channel. You can access it at meridiancity.org/live. With that, we will begin with roll call. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Garrett,
Here.
Commissioner Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Perot,
Here.
Madam Chair Lorchard.
Here. The first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. There are no changes to tonight's agenda. Please note that item number 4, Durango subdivision, has vacated their application. And item number 5, Pine 23, has requested a continuance. So if there's anyone here tonight to testify on these applications, we will not be taking public testimony this evening. Could I get a motion to adopt tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second to adopt tonight's agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item is the consent agenda, which include to approve the minutes of the June 5th Planning and Zoning meeting, findings of facts, conclusions of law for El Pollo Loco and Elite Fitness. Could I get a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
It's been moved and second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. At this time, I would briefly like to explain the public hearing process. We will open each item individually and begin with the staff report. Staff will report their findings on how the item adheres to our comprehensive plan and our unified development code. After staff has made their presentation, the applicant will come forward to present their case and respond to staff's comments. They will have 15 minutes to do so. After the applicant is finished, we will open the floor to public testimony. Each person will be called only once during public testimony. The clerk will call the names individually of those who have signed up on our website in advance to testify. You may come to the microphones and chambers, or you'll be unmuted on Zoom. Please state your name and address for the record. You will have 3 minutes to address the commission. If you've previously sent pictures or a presentation for the meeting, it will be displayed on screen and our clerk will help you run the presentation. If you have established that you're speaking on behalf of a larger group like an HOA, where others on that group will allow you to speak on their behalf, you will have up to 10 minutes. After all those who have signed up in advance have spoken, we will invite any others who wish to testify. If you wish to speak on a topic, you may come forward in chambers, or if in Zoom, please press the raise hand button in the Zoom app. And if you're only listening on a telephone, please press *9 and wait for your name to be called. If you're listening on multiple devices such as a computer and a phone, please be sure to mute those extra devices so we do not experience feedback and we can hear you clearly. When you have finished, the commission doesn't have any questions for you. You will return to your seat in chambers and be muted on Zoom and no longer have the ability to speak. And please remember, we will not call on you a second time. After all testimony has been heard, the applicant will be given another 10 minutes to come back and respond. When the applicant has finished responding to questions and concerns, we will close the public hearing and commissioners will have an opportunity to discuss, hopefully make final decisions or recommendations to City Council as needed. So we are going to open the application for Pine 43, which is asked for a continuance. We really didn't talk about this in the pre-meeting. Do we have a date that is considered for a continuation for this application?
Madam Chair, August 21st.
Can I get a motion to continue the application for Pine 43 for August 21st, please?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second to continue item number H 2024-0071, a mixed-use subdivision of Pine 43 for August 21st. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 6 on the agenda is the Idaho Power at McDermott Substation for annexation and conditional use permit at the southwest corner of McMillan and Owyhee Storm Roads. And we will begin with the staff report.
Good evening, Commissioners. Linda Ritter, in the Planning Department. So tonight we are here for a request for annexation of 2.69 acres of land from RUT in Ada County to R15 zoning district and a conditional use permit to allow for the development of the Idaho Power Substation. So this property went through a property boundary adjustment to allow for a new lot. The county allows for a one-time split. Normally the lots in Ada County are 5 acres, but they do allow for a one-time split for smaller lots. And so it went through that process to create this new lot. So this property is located at the southwest corner of McMillan Road and North Owyhee Storm Avenue. So the applicant is proposing the construction of a new substation to enhance the reliability and resilience of electrical service in Meridian and the surrounding areas of Ada County. Currently, customers in the region are served by Can Ada Station in Nampa and the 10-mile substation in Meridian. So with the rapid ongoing growth through the Treasure Valley, it has placed increased demand on the existing facilities, leading to the service strain and reduced reliability. The proposed substation is strategically designed to accommodate future growth and development while alleviating pressure on the existing infrastructure by rerouting service lines. The new facility will not only serve new residents and commercial customers, but also improve service continuity and reliability for current users. So as you can see on the site plan, they're proposing up to 2 transformers that each serve 4 distribution feeders, up to 2 breakers beneath the transmission termination structure, up to 2 metal-clad structures which manage switching of distribution feeders, 1 small control building which houses racks of switches and communication equipment, 1 transmission dead-end structure which connects the transmission line to McMillan Road. So public utility, major, and public infrastructure is the permitted use within the R15 zoning district upon the approval of a conditional use permit and compliance with the specific use standards per the UDC. Staff has determined that the proposed project aligns with these standards and is essential to support the area's long-term utility needs. And as you can see from the site plan, access will be from McMillan Road and Owyhee Storm, and this will allow for safety to accommodate the maneuvering of large transport vehicles, doing infrequent deliveries of major electrical equipment such as transformers, breakers, and the metal-clad switchgear to the substation. Under typical operating conditions, there would only be a single access point, but for this particular development, it was determined that 2 access points would be needed. So although the development of a power station is located within the residential zoning district, the applicant is proposing 30 feet of landscaping buffer to the west and south of the property to mitigate any noise that may be generated from the substation. And there's no building, but the applicant is proposing an 8-foot tall precast stamped concrete wall along McMillan Road and Owyhee Storm Avenue frontages, but staff is requiring the wall be extended around the entire substation because to the west and to the south will eventually be residential development. The application will have to go through a final design, and they will be required to meet the standards of the architectural standards manual and go through a certificate of zoning compliance prior to building permit issuance. And in residential zones, the maximum height of any fences are 6 feet, but the applicant is requesting 8 feet, so they will be going through a separate permit process outside of this to increase the height of the proposed wall to 8 feet. And that is based on site security and to deter trespassing. And the applicant is also requesting barbed wire on top of the fence, but within residential districts, it is prohibited per our UDC. So this is just an area of the area. This is the area in which the substation will be placed. So that is all the information I have on this project. And at this time, I will take any questions from the commission.
Would the applicant like to come forward? Hi, if you can state your name and address for the record, that would be great.
Give me just 1 second. Okay, you can try it now.
Hello. Okay. Madam Chair, members of the commission, Stephanie Hopkins with KM Engineering. Our address is 5725 North Discovery Way in Boise. And joining me is David Hazel with Idaho Power.
Meet you guys.
Do you want to see your address and stuff? I'm here on behalf of Idaho Power to request annexation and conditional use permit for a planned substation near Hawaii Storm and McMillan in Northwest Meridian. Staff covered our request really well, so we'll try to keep our presentation pretty short. And David's here to provide any technical information you might have on the operation of the substation. So the purpose of this project is to fulfill a need that it currently exists and future development that'll happen to fulfill that need as well. So we are requesting to locate it near, it's in the field sub-area plan, which is anticipated to include a variety of uses in the future, including commercial, residential, industrial, and public uses. So a new substation in this location will well serve the community. Substations are the point in which Idaho Power serves their customers directly with power. As this graphic shows, there are multiple ways in which power is generated. Those are all grayed out, but you could have natural gas or there could be purchased power. Those all go to, they're moved to a larger switching station, and then those are moved to transmission lines. From there, it moves to a substation like the McDermott substation, and it's distributed to homes and businesses. So the objective of this project is to meet the electrical growths and demands in this area with a new substation. This will help to relieve existing facilities. Customers in this area are currently served by the Canada substation in Nampa and the 10-mile substation in Meridian. This substation, the McDermott substation, will connect to the existing North Side substation with a new 138 kilovolt wire from the existing 230 kilovolt transmission line poles, those really large facilities along McMillan. Linda covered where this is located pretty well. So there are 2 points of access proposed to the site. One is to McMillan, the other is to Hawaii Storm. Both accesses will be gated and the entire site will be secured with a fence. As Linda mentioned, we are requesting that the south and west boundaries of this site, which are adjacent to currently undeveloped property, in the future they will be residential, and I think the multifamily kind of uses with a chain link fence. There is a 30-foot buffer area there that we believe will buffer future use as well. And we think that the chain link with that buffer will provide adequate spacing and buffer to future uses. A precast concrete wall, 8 feet, as Linda mentioned, will be located along McMillan and Hawaii Storm. This site will include up to 2 breakers, 2 metal clad structures, a small control building, which will have a variety of controls for the actual substation, and 1 transmission dead end structure on the site. So the transmission will come in from the dead end. It'll go to the transformer, which steps the electricity down to 130, or from 138 kilovolt to 12.5 kilovolt distribution feeders, and that will go to customers through the metal clad. This is this is what the precast concrete wall looks like on the left side of your screen. And then the chain link that we're proposing to locate on the south and west sides of the site would be more like the right picture. And we've been working with Public Works on pressurized irrigation requirements for the landscaping that we're showing here. Our intent would be to try to work with them to delay the landscaping if we can, to coincide well with development that's planned in the area. So we're still working with them on that and trying to find a good solution. This is just basically saying that we're complying with the comprehensive plan and the city's codes for each of the uses that are, or for the uses proposed. So the specific use standards as well as the annexation and conditional use permit standards. We've enjoyed working with staff and are really excited about this project. I think it'll provide a really necessary service to residents within this area and will help alleviate some of the constraints that are currently being noticed in the area too. So I will stand for any questions. Anything to add?
Commissioners, do we have any questions for the applicant?
Yes. Question, I heard that barbed wire is not permitted. Now, how else will you harden the site, given that there's been a lot of threats on the various water and electrical systems?
Madam Chair, Commissioner David might cover that.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, that's kind of the whole intention of the increased height on that concrete wall. And what we typically do, because I know that barbed wire is not allowed, sorry, but we'll kind of cantilever that on the inside of our fence so it's not seen. So it's pretty much obstructed by that wall, right? But that's really part of our security protocol as far as detect, deterring, delaying if anybody was to enter our site without authorization. So that's kind of our main intent there. And we do that with a combination of fencing, you know, barbed wire, cameras, all that good stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Do you plan on having cameras at the site?
It's still kind of determined at the moment. We will at some point in the future, but I don't know if once this project is energized, I don't know if we will have cameras on at that point. It's kind of security, Idaho Power Security is kind of evaluating these distribution stations and the level of security required. So our standard right now doesn't require that, but we're currently reevaluating that given the history right now.
So in regard to this particular site, I can't really speak to the one at Pocatello, but this one seems to be surrounded by residential, you know, with McMillan being one, you'll have residential across the street. You're going to have all three sides residential. How common is to have a station like this engulfed in residential areas, or are you more kind of on the sticks a little bit with the 10 Mile and the Nampa facilities?
Are you just the general location? Is that kind of question? Yeah, you mind going back to that main map? So there's kind of a few things in play here. So that existing line, which we're showing on this depiction, right? So you can see basically from north side down McDermott at that intersection, there's an existing line there. So we're basically pulling conductor up north side, tagging onto that existing line, which runs right by that property we purchased.
Right.
So it's also, I mean, convenience that our transmission line's there, right, without having to build new lines through the city. But at the same time, it helps us relieve some of the capacity on our existing feeders.
Right.
So the location is critical to our existing feeders that serve that area and taking some of that relief off with this new station.
Let me clarify my question. The
Yeah.
substation specifically, the location of the substation, which is totally fine.
Yeah,
But in this case, right now, there's just empty lots around you.
correct.
But 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to be surrounded by residential, which, you know, electricity and kids and is a concern. So you're proposing a brick wall on portion of it. You're proposing a chain link fence on the other proportion of it. Is that the best materials to use, knowing that you're going to be here for a long time, along with the development that's coming up? Is that sufficient materials enough to be able to be a good neighbor to the future residents who will be moving in next to you?
Yes, And so a lot of our standards are written around the chain link right now, and we actually put concrete curbing under the chain link fence as well so that people can't access underneath the mesh material. So, I mean, chain link is our standard currently. We've been kind of converting to some of these concrete walls in specific situations, right? And so it's just trying to make sure that with the change in material that we're used to is making sure we're capturing all of our security elements given the location like you had mentioned.
Right.
So to answer your question, yes, we do everything in our power to secure our site as much as possible from the general public.
I think from an aesthetic point, I live at Ustick and McDermott, so it's somewhat right down the street. Not that it's in my, peripheral vision, but as a neighbor, I would prefer to see the whole thing walled in as opposed to having a chain link fence. And that way you're your own little island and nobody can kind of see in, deters any kids from jumping in the wall. You're down the street from the high school. And it would just create more of an aesthetic, especially with the landscaping that's around it. Would putting a wall around the entire unit be within your periphery, or are you committed to the chain link for both sides?
It's certainly an option, but I do want to back up to that security feature, right? That, I mean, either material we choose, we're meeting specific safety standards that aren't only within our company, right? I mean, we have other entities that regulate us, so we're strict to those guidelines as well. I mean, we certainly have the option to do the concrete if you'd like. That's just an increase in cost for us.
Right.
And maintenance and that kind of stuff can be a little bit tricky, 10 to 15 years from now if concrete starts spalling versus just replacing chain link, you know what I mean? So there's some caveats there, but I mean, all in all, we're open to either option, whichever you guys would prefer. But our initial intent would be to stick to our standard where we can, and that's why that chain link is shown.
Okay. As you go to city council, I have a feeling that's going to come up again, so it might be something you'd like to talk with the city planners with, as far as just, a conversation one way or another. Commissioners, any other questions for the applicant before public testimony?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Perot?
So perhaps you could speak to that in regard to your station at Black Hat and Franklin, because you have a school right next to that and residential right next to that. So the concerns that Madam Chair has, could you address whether you had issues with that substation?
Not to my knowledge. I would have to check with our security team, but I'm not aware of any issues. And
Okay.
I haven't heard any issues with that site.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed up to testify?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have Eli Hyman.
No, not for the power station? Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, Patty Golden. Same? Okay.
Same? Okay.
No one else has signed up.
David and Stephanie, did you have anything else to add before we close the public hearing? Okay. Can I get a motion to close the public hearing, please?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to close the public hearing for Idaho Power McDermott Substation, item number H 2025-0008. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. We could definitely use the power. McMillan's got huge power lines. It makes sense of where they're going. I'm just kind of knowing the area because I live in that area, knowing that all of the fields is going to be developed in a long-term plan. I'm not a fan of chain link, but that's just me. So if it was my choice to be a neighbor of the substation, I'd like to see it cemented in, but I wouldn't hold the application back just on an aesthetic.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Smith?
I think I tend to agree with you. I think there's probably also some argument to be made regarding security, increased security of a concrete wall. It's harder to see through and see what's going on inside. I think there's a higher chance to deter anyone getting an idea of jumping over if you don't know if there's someone on the other side of the wall, et cetera. But again, I don't think it's gonna be something at the end of the day, I don't think it's gonna make or break this. I think where I'm at is I'd prefer to just maybe have that in the recommendation and have that so city council can have the conversation, which I think they'll have either way. But if that's how the commission intends to be feeling, maybe we just recommend that. But yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at.
Any thoughts?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Perot?
given how many of these substations are in the area and how experienced Idaho Power is with this, they're obviously highly committed to security in their locations. It wouldn't be good for the community if they weren't committed to that. So I'm not as concerned about that. I mean, they've had many opportunities to try out different areas, and if there were concerns about access or security, I would guess they would have already run into those at some point.
Okay. With that, after considering all staff, applicant, and public testimony, I move to recommend file number H 2025-0008 as presented in the staff report for the hearing of June 26, 2025.
Second?
It's been moved and second to approve or recommend annexation and a conditional use permit to City Council for the Idaho Power McDermott substation. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is item number H 2025-0022, Habit Burger for the conditional use permit for a restaurant drive-through at 445 Innovation Lane. And we will begin with the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. Next item on your agenda is the conditional use permit for the Habit Burger. The subject site consists of 1.16 acres of land, currently zoned CG, located at 445 South Innovation Lane in the 10-mile center development near I-84 and 10 Mile. We're here tonight to talk about the conditional use permit because this particular drive-through is within 300 feet of another drive-through. And that's later on in the evening, we'll talk about some changes to the drive-through standards, but as it's currently on the books today, this does require a CUP when it's adjacent to another drive-through. Up to the north is the Costa Vida drive-through that you guys have approved, and then also south of it is Cafe Zupas. South Innovation Lane itself was a private street that the city approved with the subdivision of the property. You could also see on the future land use map that this area is designated commercial, where we anticipate mix of commercial, restaurant, drive-through uses on the site. So again, this is consistent to the plan that is currently in place with the city and the development. And then on this graphic here, you can see where this is sandwiched between the two sites that I'd mentioned previously. So the applicant is here tonight to discuss an approximate 2,400 square foot restaurant with that accessory drive-through use. They are proposing 2 access points from South Innovation Lane, which is technically a commercial drive-L/local street. So there really is no restriction on the number of curb cuts that they could have on that particular local street. You can see customers enter the drive-through from the northern portion of the site, and there's adequate stacking for those vehicles. In addition to that, the applicant is providing the escape lane per UDC standards along the outer rim of the proposed lot, which runs along the north and then the west boundary. So cars can exit if they need to without picking up from the ordering window. Looking at the overall proposal, both the use and the drive-through use do meet UDC standards. Because this is a restaurant use, the UDC does have a higher parking ratio than our typical commercial uses. This particular site is required by code to provide a minimum of 10 parking spaces, and the site plan before you this evening depicts 57 parking spaces, which is far exceeds what UDC code requires. Looking at the public record, we did not receive any public testimony on the site. And as the applicant moves through the process with us, they will have to get their design review approved from the 10 Mile Center Design Review Board, and then come back with a future certificate of zoning compliance to finalize their site design. But again, everything that's before you this evening does meet UDC standards. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation and stand for any questions you may have.
Would the applicant like to come forward? Are they in
Yeah, live.
chambers or? Oh,
Tom.
Tom Wong is raising his hand. And you just muted your, oh, no, you're not.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for reviewing our CUP application. This is Tom Wong with Commercial Development Resources, CDR. We are consultant to Habit Burger, burger spelled with a B-U-R, as opposed to B-R-U. Anyway,
Can we get your address for the record, please?
sure. It's 695 Town Center Drive in Costa Mesa, California, 92626.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, basically it's pretty straightforward layout. Pretty much very similar to our south property, where we have a drive coming in from the north and coming out to the south. Um and we did as best we could with the site, and it's looking forward to moving this forward. But did you have any specific questions for us?
Commissioners, do we have any questions for the applicant at this time? Nope, I think we are good. So I will have you sit back for a moment and we will see if there's anybody signed up for public testimony, okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No one has signed up.
Mr. Wong, do you have any other comments before we close the public hearing?
I do not have any other comments or questions. Thank
Okay.
you.
May I get a motion to close the public hearing, please?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second to close the public hearing for Habit Burger. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. This is Restaurant Row, so, adding another one, we knew it was coming, it's just a matter of time, as long as it fits the city's descriptions of filling out the codes and making sure that there's through traffic and its design standards. I don't see why it would have any, complications of offering a conditional use permit. This makes it closer to my house. So, and actually, for this side of Meridian, we don't have a drive-through Habit. The one in the village is a walk-up restaurant. Any other comments about the Habit?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Smith?
after considering all staff applicant public testimony, I move to approve file number H-2025-0022 as presented in the staff report.
Second.
It's been moved and second to approve the Habit. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Wong. Okay, moving right along. The next item on the agenda is item number 2025-0006 for a preliminary plat to subdivide 2 existing parcels into smaller lots across 3 phases for Mogul Industrial Park at Black Cat Road and I-84. And we'll begin with the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. You nailed the description of the project. Thank you. It is a preliminary plat on 88.2 acres of land currently zoned IL. As you mentioned, it is adjacent to I-84 and Black Cat. If you recall, this project was before you in 2022, where it's received its annexation with that IL zoning designation. As part of that approval, there's requirements for road improvements, amount of uses were restricted through that development agreement, timing for thresholds for extending the collector road through the site. So I want to make it clear to this body tonight that this property does not require to be subdivided. The applicant is just proposing to do that. So under that current DA, there's nothing in there that doesn't allow them to move forward with additional development on this site. Again, for construction purposes and phasing is what I understand being the primary driver for subdividing the property. You also notice looking at this map that it seems like the 2 parcels are disjointed or not connected. That isn't a typical subdivision that you see in front of you, but I can assure you, based on what you're seeing here, the applicant has done a series of property boundary adjustments to carve out the configuration that you see here. So they are legal parcels, and then in our coordination with the Ada County Assessor's Office, They've said as long as the right-of-way touches between the two parcels and ACHD signs the plat, and it's within the same section of the city, it could be considered as one preliminary plat. So even though you see it connected by a roadway, the county still sees this as one plat, and so we have moved forward with that determination from the county. The other pieces that are gray around this area are still part of that development, and the applicant does have CC&Rs in place that basically align all of these properties to share in the landscape responsibilities, roadways, and cross-access between all the properties. You can see here on the future land use map that it does have 2 comprehensive plan designations. I won't go into that too much, just for the fact that it's already been annexed and zoned and there's a DA. So again, currently there are 6 buildings constructed on the site and ready to be occupied on the site. So they've already moved forward with a large portion of the site, and they're ready to get tenants and businesses operating in this part of Meridian. So here is the preliminary plat. It does consist of 11 industrial lots on 88.2 acres of land. You can see here in the preliminary plat, these 4 lots here have existing buildings on them. This larger parcel just to the west is St. Luke's that was purchased from the applicant, and that's developed. And there's an existing building here that was just recently signed off by planning as well, with all parking and landscaping in. So really what we're looking at is the remaining of this portion here. And then, as you recall, 3 or 4 months ago, this property was annexed into the city by the same developer, entered into a DA, which that property is still part of the overall development for this site. So again, it's one cohesive development just coming in on different phases and different parts and pieces, or different timing. As part of this development, the 10-mile interchange specific area plan calls for specific collector roadways to be built within this development. You can see that here on the concept plan. So this is the east-west collector portion of that master street map, required collector road, which is called Grand Mogul. It's currently built to about this location, about 1/3 of the way into the site. And that's been essentially deeded to ACHD and constructed per their development agreement and per ACHD standards. As I mentioned too, and as the chair mentioned, this preliminary plat will be phased in 3 developments. So again, this middle portion will be phase 2, and then the last phase will be this northwest quadrant and a portion of the north-south collector road here. So probably there's a picture of the phasing plan here, but we've got a blown up picture here probably for you, so you can see the phasing a little bit more here. So phase 1, those first 2 lots, and phase 2 are the 3 interior lots, and then the last phase is lot 3, block 2, which also includes a portion of the north-south roadway that we'll spend probably some time discussing this evening. Also with this is the other unique part about this development is some of the landscaping is already in along the street frontages. And so anytime a developer has to subdivide the property, the code either requires those street buffers to be in a common lot or a dedicated easement. And so as the applicant works with staff on their phasing and their plat submittals, they'll have to graphically depict those easements on their final plats to ensure they're meeting the required landscape buffers per city code. So along Black Cat, they've installed a 25-foot buffer, and then the collector streets require a 20-foot buffer. The other part of the street network, the applicant's also providing 10-foot sidewalks on each side of the roadways as well. So they're, rather than having the multi-use pathway along the interstate within the 50-foot buffer, during the annexation of the property, the Parks Department agreed to allow the applicant to add those to the on-street network with the collector street. So that's why you see 10-foot sidewalks on each side of that collector roadway, along with the northern portion of the north-south collector roadway, which is along the west boundary here. Again, here's, you saw what I was mentioning, the existing conditions, so you can see they've progressed quite a bit on the property. And then here's the landscape plan that coincides with their phasing. Again, those required buffers are depicted along the roadways. Again, they'll have to indicate that here because of these 4 parcels. That's a requirement or a condition of approval in the staff report. And then along the freeway, we require a 50-foot buffer. And so they'll do that, and I'll let the commission know that the landscaping will be phased consistent with the phasing plan that I just shared with you. So really, if you had a chance to look through the staff report, the applicant did send me an email, had a few items of discussion they wanted to take up with you this evening. Probably a majority of it is really the extension of the north-south collector roadway along Lot 3, Block 2. So this area here. So this is a schematic that I put together to explain what we're trying to achieve, at least in the area, and with the extension of the collector network. So I asked the applicant to provide an exhibit how the east-west or the north-south collector road could be extended in the future. And that's the red line that you see on the graphic here. You can see that it jogs off, runs up about 3/4 of the property and dead ends. The required ACHD turnaround will be on Lot 3, Block 2 in this general location. So don't be alarmed that there's not a required turnaround at the end of the street. There is. They're just working with ACHD on that. And when they come in with their final plat, they'll provide that, show that turnaround easement on their buildable lot. And then ACHD's construction or review staff will approve that turnaround. And then as it heads north off their site, it is running on the adjacent property on the west side of the Rosenloft Drain, which you see here. The reason why I brought it up in the staff report is because our long-range planning staff is working with ACHD on the widening of West Franklin Road. And so the connection point or that intersection isn't quite laid out or planned yet. And so now that we have some vacant properties in the area, we're subdividing. Now it's maybe the right time to have that conversation to make sure the plans that we're working on align with what we're trying to achieve in the area. There's some pros and cons to that. So the exhibit here, the lines in the blue is what staff's recommended as far as the alignment for the north-south collector. The applicant would only be required to stub to this portion. So the blue north of that is just a graphic representation of what it could like, consistent with the master street map. As you head on the other side of Franklin Road, you see my yellow line here at the top of the graphic. That's where it's depicted on the north side of Franklin. That's where the master street map shows it aligning. So if the applicant were to, or if this road was to connect into Franklin where the applicant is proposing, there is a possibility or chance that that intersection wouldn't align. It would be offset, which could be problematic. It's not uncommon, but it could be problematic. When I looked at the recorded development agreement for this site and the concept plan in that DA, it did show the road along the entire boundary stubbing to their north boundary. So it did, this plan or this plat does fall short of it going to the north boundary consistent with the concept plan. But I don't want you to get into the weeds on that too much because again, they are still providing that north-south collector roadway consistent with the master street map. ACHD has approved the location as proposed by the applicant. So really, I wasn't trying to derail the conversation tonight. I just wanted us to have the conversation as when the timing and what is the best location for that roadway, because the city is starting to see some development happening in this location on the west side of Black Hat, and it's starting to funnel westward. So we are starting to build this existing east-west collector road north of this development. And so we really have to be cognizant on how all of this connects and aligns in the future. But like I said, again, collector road was required with the DA. It's there. ACHD has said yes. Keep in mind, the other reason why staff has recommended that it go on the east side of the drain versus the west side is just a logical expansion of city services and development in the area. But when talking with the applicant, they raised some valid concerns too. By moving the road to the east, you're impacting smaller developments, which have a harder time carrying the cost and building those roadways when you have a large property to the west that's still vacant and could also easily facilitate the extension of that roadway. So again, more discussion points. I know the applicant's going to discuss with you kind of their rationale for why they located where the road is. But I just wanted to at least have that conversation and show you that there's other alternatives here than just putting it on the north and south. I mean, looking at again, staff is recommending approval with conditions. There are a few modifications that I would like the commission to make tonight as far as the conditions of approval go. So like I mentioned to you earlier in my presentation, the applicant, one of the concerns we raised with the applicant before we even processed the application was, how is cross-access going to work with the parcels that aren't part of the subdivision? When you subdivide a property, we can have them add a note on the plat that addresses cross-access, but how does it work when you have a portion of a project that's platted and a portion that isn't, but it's still all governed by one DA and one master plan? And so the applicant did provide us a recorded copy of their CC&Rs, and the entire property is encumbered by those. So in my emails discussion with the applicant, staff feels comfortable as long as the plat notes that their CC&Rs in effect and that cross-access are bound by those CC&Rs. We're good with changing the language that they don't need to either add a note to say cross-access is provided, or add the note that references the CC&Rs that we have on file. And then that way we know cross-access is covered by, for the entire development, just not a portion of it. The second request is to strike condition 4B. That was a redundant condition that did not need to be in there. It referenced landscaping on both sides of the pathway, and because the 10-foot multi-use pathway or sidewalks are contained within the 20-foot buffers, the code doesn't require us to double dip and require twice the landscaping along that. So they're only required to meet the subdivision or the street buffer requirements of the landscape ordinance, not the pathway requirement. So again, it was just a redundant condition that needs to be stricken from the record. And then the applicant also the staff also had a condition 5 in there. It speaks to adding additional landscaping adjacent to the collector roads. We asked that they provide an additional 5 feet if parking was going to be adjacent to the street buffers, because we don't want vehicles overhanging into that buffer or overhanging the pathway. I don't know if that necessarily needs to be a plat condition. It's something that we can work with the applicant on as we go through that CDC design review process with them. That's really a parking lot landscape requirement that we look at as we get farther into the weeds. But we just at least want the applicant to be on notice that if there is parking, you're going to have to mitigate that somehow by adding additional parking, whether it's 3 feet of parking with wheel stops, curbing, or adding 5 feet and shortening their parking stalls and allowing the vehicles to overhang a little bit more into that parking. But again, I had a conversation with the applicant. They understand that. And again, if you feel desire to strike that condition, you can. Again, we'll get it with CZC design review. I haven't formally asked you to strike it because it only says it's required if it abuts parking. So it wouldn't be applicable if they didn't have parking there. So I'll let the applicant try to sway you or advocate for that as they present to you. But other than that, I think for the most part, we're pretty much in alignment with the applicant. Looking at the public record, there was no public testimony that came in on this application. Again, I'll conclude my presentation. Stand for any questions you may have.
Bill, a couple questions in regard to the item 5 parking. Is it for consumer parking or employee parking or any parking?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, it's any parking.
Any. And one other question before the applicant comes up for clarification. So phase 3 talks about the north-south access. Do we know when Franklin is proposed to be widened?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, I can look that up on ACHD's website, but maybe the applicant knows more. They work more directly with them on that. I can tell you, the one thing that I can tell you is when the applicant was in front of you with the annexation, they tried hard to work with the adjacent property owner to build that road as part of this development. So we could get that out sooner, get it done sooner rather than later, but it just couldn't get that easement in place to extend that roadway as I showed you in their exhibit. So at least they tried and they can't and they couldn't. But again, this is consistent with the master street map. We just want to make sure, is it in the right spot? will it align in the future with Franklin? If not, keep in mind, it's the third phase, so we do have time to work with the applicant. They have the time to work with ACHD, so I think whether or not we don't solve that tonight, we can certainly continue to work with the applicant and maybe have some more definitive answers as we go to city council and bring up this topic.
Yeah, one more thing. Can you bring up the slide that shows the shadows of the property lines that you had before with your blue lines and your red lines there? So is this an existing road that goes north-south, or is that just between properties? So I'm looking at the storage lot, and then I think I'm looking at the plantation house that I think is currently for sale. Is that a street that goes through there right now, or is that just access for the farms? The red line?
Oh, this red line here?
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, that is their proposal where they think it will connect to Franklin. So there's nothing there. That gravel road that you see adjacent to that red line is the ditch. It's the irrigation district's access and probably along Rosenloft drain there.
Okay, and so the McDermott Road is further west than the two parcels shaded gray?
Yes, you got it.
Okay, okay, just want a point of reference. All right, any other questions for staff before we invite the applicant up? All right, would the applicant like to come forward? Hi, you can state your name and address for the record, that would be great.
Sure thing. I don't know if I can quite get to the microphone.
Fine.
Thank you. My name is Jason Densmer. I'm a principal civil engineer with the Land Group. Our address is 462 East Shore Drive in Eagle. I'm pleased to be here tonight on behalf of the applicant. The other members of the development team are here also. Should you have any questions that I need to fall back to them. Bill and the staff have done a great job of analyzing our application and summarizing it for you. We're pleased to be here tonight, almost in full support of his recommendation. As he mentioned, the project was annexed in 2022 and has a development agreement. Since then, the development has been progressing pretty rapidly. There are 6 buildings complete today. We've completed the first third or so of the east-west collector road called Grand Bogle Drive and dedicated that to ACHD. We've constructed street frontage improvements along Black Cat, including landscape and multi-use pathways. And we've gotten to a point now where the proposed subdivision would allow us to continue the regular development of the project. As Bill mentioned, we could continue under the development agreement, but having these parcels separated into individual lots allows greater flexibility for the owner in terms of financing and ownership. The layout of the project and the design is still consistent with the development agreement. We're just asking for approval to superimpose new property lines on top of that development. So
You might have better luck with the arrows up and down.
there we go. Regarding the conditions of approval, we're in support of all of them, including the recommendations for modifications that Bill described tonight, with the exception of condition number 2. And you'll notice there's actually 2 condition number 2s. So I mean the second one that's in bold text.
I'm not sure if that's in front of us right now. Can you tell us do you know what that is?
It has to do with the north-south collector road.
Oh, okay.
The condition number 2 requires that we resubmit updated preliminary plat materials within 15 days of the city council hearing to redesign the north-south collector road to the east side of the Rosenloft drain. As Bill said, there's been a lot of prior work on this, and we'd like to just talk through the logic of it, because until the staff report was issued last week, we didn't realize that there was any concern from the city about where the north-south collector road ran. As I mentioned, we've been working out here for a while and have coordinated with ACHD and reviewed the master street map and have ACHD support through their staff report for our proposed location of the north-south collector. It's a little bit of a unique situation because along the north boundary of the Mogul Industrial Park, or Meridian Commerce Park as we're putting on the sign, is the Rosenloft Drain. And as it gets to the west edge of Meridian Commerce Park, the Rosenloft Drain makes a 90-degree corner and heads due north. both on our property and as it extends to the north, the drain is centered on the property line. And so the easement, which is Nampa Meridian's easement, affects both property owners, both us in the case of the south and our neighbors to the north. And then once the drain turns to the north and heads towards Franklin, Nampa Meridian's easement affects both property owners on each side. And so stubbing a road due north at the corner actually puts it right on top of the Rosenloft drain and in conflict with Nampa Meridian's easement. So it seemed to us early on that it was going to be necessary for that north-south collector to diverge either to the east or to the west, because it clearly can't be on top of drain. ACHD and Nampa Meridian get along in a lot of ways, but they will not let us put a road on top of a drain easement. And I think ACHD had realized that also, because the master street map also shows that the road will be located west of the Rosenloft drain. So we thought that that was what agencies had laid forward as far as groundwork for us. And it also made sense logically that the roadway be west of the Rosenloft drain, because that's a single large parcel. It's about 103-acre parcel. It's under single ownership. There's a lot of flexibility with a parcel that size to develop and accommodate construction of a road in a kind of a logical way. Conversely, on the east side of the Rosenloft, which is staff's recommendation that we consider, there's two parcels. They're both smaller. One of them is currently being used as a storage parcel. And just by the virtue of the fact that there are two, getting the road from our project to Franklin Road will require two parcels to develop, which sequentially may not happen as quickly as a single large parcel could. In addition to that, the two parcels being smaller are more restricted from a planning standpoint, and a road is much more impactful in terms of percentage of the land area. The smallest parcel there is about 8 acres, and just a conceptual design for the road suggests that almost 20% of it could be consumed in the roadway, which is a tremendous amount of land area for that one parcel to have to dedicate, and not leaving much flexibility for anything else to happen. So we think there's logic in our proposal. It was supported by the master street map at ACHD and supported by ACHD's staff report that agreed with our location. So it would be our request that as you're considering the conditions of approval tonight, you strike condition of approval number 2, part 2, that asks us to redesign the project on that one element. Other than that, we appreciate staff's report and agree with his conclusions, and we'd love your support as we move forward to a city council meeting.
I have a few questions. In regard to the property to the west, where you're suggesting that the road goes, you have no ownership in that parcel, correct?
No, the parcel to the west is owned by a third party.
By a third party. And that's not going to be part of your subdivision where the north-south, and I'm talking about the one that hits Franklin, where you're proposing the road to go. And then what you're suggesting is that you want it to the east. No, you want it to the west, right? And then city is suggesting to the east, which would affect those two smaller parcels. So from a business standpoint, you know, if ACHD and the irrigation companies, you know, want those roads, and now you've got a drain in the middle of all of this at the same time, the marketability of the western property just gets compromised because the road goes there, you know, because of your buffers and your land and all those other types of things. So there may be some financial impact to that larger landowner, and obviously a significant financial impact to the two smaller parcels. So ACHD has their wish list, you have yours. What does the irrigation company prefer? Where would they like to see it? Do they want to see it east of the drain or west of the drain?
Madam Chair, that's actually an interesting question. I don't think the irrigation district weighed in providing a staff comment on that question. We've worked with them extensively on the other areas of it. And in fact, under the development agreement, the city agreed that the Rosenloft drain should remain open. I think that's the irrigation district's primary concern, is just that the drain remain open and continue to function.
And when you say open, you mean not tiled, open as, okay, so now we have a property to the west who's, if the road goes to the west, you've got a property who's gonna lose, what, 40, 50 feet of marketable area because of the road and the drainage ditch. Or if you move it to the east, now you're compromising two smaller parcels with an open drain and a road. If I'm that small guy, not the storage guy, but if I'm that little guy right there, you just took about 20% of my land in order for me to sell that to anybody. And as much as the collector road would be fabulous for in and out, but now my parcel's a tiny little rectangle compared to what it is before. So the placement of this road actually becomes a bigger picture for future development. And technically it shouldn't be yours because you're to the south of that, but it all kind of ties together, right? And we have time because of the phasing. And then you add on top of that Franklin Road being expanded in the future, and the city wants alignment because we don't want to be zigzagging all over the place. So for continuity, I would be interested to hear what the irrigation company, besides the fact that they want it opened, of where they would prefer the road and how that's going to affect all three of those landowners. So, if I owned any one of these parcels, I would have concerns because that road, whether it be done through eminent domain or however it's going to become, is going to become a big issue as we go forward, as the city grows, as you create connectivity with your third phase. So as you go forward to city council, I would implore you to talk to the irrigation district to see what, if they had they were king for a day, where would they want the road? And hopefully you've already seemed to get your blessing from ACHD. The city has their proposal of what they want and what you want. And hopefully everyone can come to the conclusion of what the best impact is, not only for today, but 5 years from now or whenever those roads are going to be developed. Does that make sense? So, okay. Commissioners, do we have any other questions for the applicant before we open public testimony?
Yeah, I mean, just from an economic standpoint, I agree that if you could go west, that's a much a less impact on that larger property than it would be on the two smaller ones. You're almost negating the value of the two smaller ones with a road.
And that's what they would like. The city would like them to go east.
That's correct.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah,
I hear.
okay.
That's why I see the east as the most favorable compromise, and that's what it is as a development.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Smith?
question, I guess, for staff or the applicant. I just want to confirm that both on the north side of Franklin and the south side, these would be left in. Oh, is that they're not going to be right in restricted? Right in, right out, or?
I don't
Okay.
think so.
I just wanted to confirm, because I think that's the one thing that we have not discussed, I think, in terms of takings and, the most equitable move. I think we've had that conversation, but also just making sure we preserve the connectivity. I don't have as much of a concern if, rather than I'm trying to go northbound, instead of going straight up, I take a right and then a left. I don't have as much of a concern there, as long as that's not somehow being prohibited by the configuration of the street. That's why I was asking. But
Madam Chair, Commissioner Smith, of course, the intersection with Franklin of this north-south collector is not part of our application or our project. But my belief is that ACHD envisions that to be a full motion intersection when it's constructed in the future. And in addition to that, there was a question earlier about the status of ACHD's Franklin Road project. I think it was articulated in ACHD staff report that that's currently under design. They intend to do property acquisition over the next couple of years, but they haven't yet identified a construction year for the project.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Smith?
that actually raises a question for me. If the intention is for it to be a controlled intersection, are you saying that it's your belief that they intend to move the north connection also to the west? Or I guess what I'm struggling with is their plan for that to be a fully controlled intersection. How would that work if this moves to the east and is now out of alignment with that northern, collector?
Commissioner Smith, it's pretty hard for me to design ACHD's intersection from the dais here, but I'm sure that they would figure out a solution that's safe for everyone. I guess the pertinent point that we wanted to bring forward is that this north-south collector is anticipated to be built by development. It won't be an eminent domain. ACHD is not going to go acquire property to construct the north-south collector, and it'll wait until the property owners between us and Franklin Road develop. Looking in the crystal ball, you have to consider whether you think it's more likely for the two small landowners to develop and make that connection, or if it's more likely that the single large landowner would bring forward an application to do that. Ultimately, everyone I think would like to have it connected as soon as possible, but it's under the control of those other people that aren't here tonight.
Right. And also understand our purview too is to do what's in the best interest of the city, not just at this point in this application, but looking at the future land use map and how that all connects together. And when we're dealing with undeveloped land, even though we are evaluating your application individually, it does connect. And that is something as a commission we need to look at as well. So, okay, thank you. Let's open for public testimony and we'll go from there. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed up to testify?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No one has signed up.
And no one online as well? Jason, do you have any other comments that you'd like to make before we close the public hearing? Okay, can I get a motion to close the public hearing, please?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second to close the public hearing for item number H 2025-006. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to go on the record. It got some new information that it looks like ACHD is moving Franklin Road up to 2029.
The only portion of Franklin Road that's not wider, because Black Cat is, right, up until that second or third parcel, and then ITD is doing just down the street at McDermott. So we're less than, what, a mile? That just needs to be widened so that everybody is the same width and length. And because you're industrial or light industrial and access to the freeway and Highway 16 is going to be a big part of your marketability of your project, it's important that all these pieces kind of fit together. I guess, I'm looking at it as a landowner who's in the impact area of Highway 16 and very familiar with people developers working with land, ACHD working with land, widening roads and things like that. I understand your point of moving it to the west, which makes sense for the larger landowner to assume the financial costs of that road. It would be very detrimental for the two smaller parcels to do it. But what I have learned in this valley is that water trumps everything. So, I've seen people do improvements along the irrigation district based on the county, specifically Ada County, and then had to rip everything out because Nampa Meridian Irrigation said that's not allowed. So as long as those two agencies continue to work together, the irrigation and ACHD, along with the developers, I think we'll be fine. The fact that they want it open surprises me, considering we're looking at industrial development mostly in that corridor. I'm not going to hold back this application based on the location of the road, but, and phase 3 sounds like it's going to be a few years away, so there's time. But before you go to city council, you might want to get a weigh-in from the irrigation district of where their preference of the road might be. And that might help with long-term planning as far as whether it should be east of the drainage ditch or west of it. I personally, I'm not inclined to, I guess I guess I don't feel like I have enough information to say we should strike item number 2 to redesign for the east. But I'd like to hear from the other commissioners and see what they think.
Madam Chair, I think I'm in agreement with you. I think especially, and I know this isn't the prerogative of the applicant, but this does factor into the decision, what ACHD's plans are about that intersection. If it's an uncontrolled intersection, that I think that is one decision. But if there's intention for it to be a controlled intersection, I think that really changes the calculus on whether it's important for there to be a straight through connection or, you know, a right angle kind of turn scenario. So I think if the road gets moved to the west by city council, I don't think there's it's the end of the world. I think this is still a good application aside from that, but I don't think I'm comfortable moving to strike that language at the moment, just lacking that knowledge. And I don't know that this is a big enough issue to need to continue over, but I think it's definitely something that in lacking that information, I think my judgment is defaulting to staff's recommendation, absent kind of some of that clarity.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Perot.
I apologize if I wasn't tracking on this, but I have a question for Bill. As far as the applicant is concerned, they're only responsible for taking that section up to the northern boundary of lot 3, right? So they're not, I mean, their responsibility is just to take that up to the section of their property. So we're talking about whether we're moving to the east or the west, and ultimately they're not the ones that are going to put that road in. So help me connect the dots here on whether we're just talking about how they design it up to their northern lot line and how we're tying that to the decision of the preliminary plat. Like, how are we making that a condition of the preliminary plat? Because all the time I've been doing this, I don't recall us having this specific type of decision.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, Commissioner Pearl, you are correct. We are only talking about that much of it. And like I mentioned to you, the concept plan that's in the development agreement did show it going all the way up along that boundary. But as the applicant mentioned, as you start having those discussions and figure out where this road lands, sometimes those things change. In a DA, it's a concept plan. And then when you're starting to get actual development plans and looking at constraints and trying to align everything, things can change. And that's where, as planning, we lean on ACHD to say, hey, what is the best approach? And then we also coordinate with ACHD on the master street map. And so, yes, the conversation's broader than it needs to be, but at the same time, I think it's an important conversation because if we don't get it right, where are we shifting that burden on one or the other property owner? It's at the same time, we have to do what's in the best interest for the city and the future development of this area. So ultimately, you're right, 20% of that smaller property is being affected, but what if somebody buys all of those properties and now becomes and consolidates it into one larger project? Now it's not such a burden because they've consolidated properties to do something different. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but we've seen it time and time again where people can come consolidate properties and get a larger piece to offset some of those costs. I agree with you. If it was just that road on that small piece of property, it looks like it is burdening the smaller property owner versus the bigger property owner. But for tonight's purposes, the plat is a mechanism for extending roadways. And if the condition is written that they stub it to their north boundary, not
All the way.
where it aligns on Franklin, just you stub it to your northern boundary. And then where it goes from there will be determined. But that's how the condition's currently written.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Perot.
So that piece has to be completed and built to the northern line by the time the certificate of occupancy is issued for that lot?
That is correct.
And will there be other opportunities for the same conversation to be had prior to that? Or is this the last opportunity for commission or council to put teeth into that, or to create that condition?
Correct. Like, when we go to a final plat, we can't change the conditions of approval or provide more restrictive or new conditions on the applicant. So this is the time to get it right. Again, the condition can be flexible. It can say, work with Napa Meridian, work with the city, work with HHD. As I mentioned, this is their third phase. So it may be some time before they have to get that resolved, but there's time, but this is the time to figure out where we generally want it located.
On another note, all of the other items that you have as far as your development look great. But like Bill said, we want to make sure we get it right, not only for your business plan and your movability for your tenants to be able to use that collector road in an efficient way, but also what's in the best interest of the city. So as far as conditions are concerned, honestly, I know the city likes it to the east, but I have to say, if the burden of the road is going to be on the developer, those two smaller parcels, I agree with Jason that that would be a huge financial burden compared to the west, regardless if it gets consumed by a bigger one or not. I think the only condition I would want to put before it goes to city council is that the applicant works with ACHD and specifically the irrigation district of where they see it happening, because the water is going to be one of the most essential parts of that construction at the end of your development, and the future connectivity of where your tenants will be able to move around, right? So it's in your best interest that we get this road right, that not everybody's doing all these little curves and all these other things, and that especially if the irrigation ditch is going to be open and you have box trucks and possibly 18-wheelers going through. So any other comments from commissioners?
Yeah, I'd like to see maximum flexibility because, as you say, the variables between the irrigation district, whoever is going to own those properties, if there's going to be an additional owner or a new owner, I think, and the length of time between now and, I think Bill said 2029. I mean, gosh, that's a long time.
It is.
And we don't know what the irrigation district is going to say. And so I think committing to a certain position, I think is just too unknown right now.
Any other comments before we make a motion?
Sure.
Commissioner Perot?
I agree with Commissioner Garrett on that. I'd like to see maximum flexibility on this and wonder if there isn't even a way that we can change the wording of the condition to make sure that when council does the same deliberation that it's reflecting, we believe there should be some flexibility in that. I understand staff's recommendation to make it a condition that section shift to the east. I just have some concerns of setting that condition in how it's currently worded, but the revised wording I can't recommend.
And then, Bill, you also wanted to add to our motion that the CC&Rs in effect include cross-access throughout the property is provided. And did you want us to strike 4B, which references landscaping on the street buffer requirements?
Yeah, Madam Chair, that is correct. The requirement for pathway landscaping is not required.
Pathway landscaping.
Madam Chair.
to pathway landscape.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Smith?
I guess this is a legal question regarding, in terms of requiring things prior to the city council hearing. If I could wave my magic wand, I'd say something like, you need to get feedback from NMID and ACHD on this. That sounds like that's also putting the prerogative on them. It's placing a condition that depends on ACHD and NMID getting back to them in time. So I'm just curious, is there a way that we can do that legally, but not, I don't know if you get what I'm saying. If someone at NMID is on vacation or drops the ball, I don't want it. That's I don't think we can make that the developer's fault. That makes sense.
Madam Chair, a way you could word that would be to say that you require them to reach out to ACHD and the irrigation company by X date requesting feedback, and then they've done their part, in 2 weeks or a week or whatever it is, however long you want to give them. And then if they hear back, great. And if they don't, then they've at least complied with the condition.
Commissioner Pearl?
Bill, Madam Chair just mentioned adding that plat note. Is that not already condition 3D?
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the commission, it is. It's just modifying. We'll wordsmith it a little bit, but it says and it can probably be or, but we'll wordsmith it a little bit more because like I mentioned to you in my staff presentation, we have the CCNRs, so we know cross access is out there. We just need to make sure that it's referenced correctly on the plat.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I realize I'm completely out of order because the public hearing has been closed, but as I hear you wrestle with this north-south collector road alignment question, we're happy to reach out to Nampa Meridian, ACHD, whoever you would like. There is risk that, ACHD has already said that they were comfortable with our proposal. There is a risk that we wouldn't get a response back. And even if they did respond, I think that we're all trying to figure out what the right thing will be several years from now, and to make that decision over the next couple of weeks before a council meeting might kind of circumvent the natural evolution of this area. I think we'd be in stronger favor of a rewording of the condition of approval just to provide us flexibility to resolve the final alignment of that street as we get towards phase 3 of the project in a few years. Certainly the picture will be clearer then than it is today or will be in the next week or two.
Okay, thank you. Okay. You want to stab at this or you want me to?
Well, Madam Chair, I think that raises a question again, kind of defaulting back to that question of when will we get another, at bat, or, when's the latest that we can kind of require some compliance. I think what the applicant said, it makes sense to me, but I don't know how we could essentially delay past the final plat.
Oh, I wouldn't want to delay the application. I mean,
No, not-
I think
that's
they
delay.
would go have due diligence to communicate with the agencies and get
Yeah.
more information to city council.
Yeah.
And they can deliberate, like Jessica said, based on their knowledge of the area as well.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think I'm specifically talking to the desire to require some reconciliation prior to phase 3, but not within the next few weeks of city council. I don't know that there's a mechanism, and if there's any, staff can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if there's a mechanism by which we can do that. Is that right?
Oh, Madam Chair, members of the commission, they're phasing the project. So again, if you want a condition on their preliminary plat, you can say prior to submittal of phase 3, they have the alignment of the collector road figured out, whatever that is. I don't have the wordsmith either, but we can come up with some language if that's the desire of the commission to do that. Like I said, it could be tomorrow. The risk that we run is, keep in mind that there is a development agreement, and in the DA, they don't need to subdivide the property. So it really becomes a plat condition, not necessarily a DA DA provision. Again, like I mentioned to you, the concept plan and the DA showed it along that their west boundary stubbing to the north. But again, it was a concept plan. There's nothing in the DA that says thou shalt do that other than the picture. Again, we try to give applicants flexibility because we know things can change as you talk with the different agencies and understand what's occurring around development. So, but I'm comfortable if you like that verbiage, if you want to do that. And again, like you said, it's going to go to council and council can discuss it and see whether or not they agree with that or not. And I'm sure they'll watch this and we'll report back in your commission recs that this was a topic of discussion. They'll probably want to know more about it. And hopefully the applicant will get some more information and we can continue to work with the applicant as they transition as well. Though I'm sure they'll reach out to us and say, hey, what can we do to try to get this resolved before city council?
Right.
At least that's been my experience with them.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner
I
Smith?
can try taking a stab at this.
Okay.
All right, after considering all staff applicant and public testimony, I move to recommend approval of file number H-2025-0006 as presented in the staff report with the following modifications. To modify condition 3D to read or to change the word between subdivision and add, to modify that from an and to an or, and then to strike condition 4B. And then lastly, to modify the second condition to require the applicant have alignment of the north-south collector road with staff, NMID, and ACHD prior to submittal of phase 3.
Second.
It's been moved and second to approve file number H 2025-006 to city council with modifications mentioned. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for your patience. We appreciate it. Okay, do we need a break or you want to keep going? Got a few comprehensive planned map and UDC text amendment. It's 8 o'clock. Why don't we take 5 minutes and then we can reconvene for more of the land use applications. Thanks. Okay, thank you for your patience. We'll call the meeting back to order. The next item on the agenda is item number H 2025-0029 for a comprehensive plan map amendment to modify boundaries on the future land use map. And we'll begin with the staff report.
Right. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission. For the record, and for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Carl Anderson. I'm a long-range associate planner here with the city of Meridian. Tonight, what you have before you is a request to modify the city's future, it's a comprehensive plan land use map amendment, to modify the city's future land use map along with the city's area of city impact. I'll go through that request before you tonight. This request, after council, it's heard by council, will go to Ada County for the reestablishment of the city's area of impact. Thank you. Is that better? So why this request is before you tonight, during the 2024 state legislative session, Idaho Code 676526 was amended, modifying the area of city impacts criteria. A few key highlights of that state code, those amendments in there were the requirement for areas of city impact must be within 2 miles from municipal city limits. Also, considerations for service planning, some of those criteria evaluating those areas of city impact was included in there. Those are listed in the staff report on pages 10 and 11 with review there as well. Additionally, it clarified that areas of city impact fall under the jurisdiction of Ada County, or the counties that those cities or those municipalities lie within. It also established that cities may have planning activities, including comprehensive planning, outside of the area of city impact. So the change before you tonight, the request includes the proposal to remove 38 parcels totaling 507.34 acres, not including right-of-way, and the addition of 1 parcel totaling 5.06 acres. This request is located at 12504 West Amity Road. This was recently removed from the City of Boise area of city impact, and that resolution is contained within the staff report. This parcel would be designated as medium density residential on the city's future land use map. Additionally, the modifications would include entryway corridor modifications accordingly. So for those areas being removed, extending through the portions that are remaining within the area of city impact and along West Amity Road. All noticing requirements have been met. Courtesy notices were sent to all property owners for the parcels involved with the request. Staff did receive 1 phone call from a property owner whose parcel was being removed from the city's area of impact. Staff detailed what the request was involving and answered questions. Property owner didn't indicate whether they were in favor, neutral, or opposed to the request. So the map on the left is the area that's located in southwest Meridian area of impact. This area includes 512.95 gross acres. The difference here being areas that are right-of-way that are inclusive therein. The map on the right is the area that's proposed to be added to the area of city impact. It's 507 gross acres. Again, this is inclusive of right-of-way. This would have the designation as shown here as medium density residential, as is consistent with the properties within Meridian city limits, which are medium density residential on the future land use map as well. Staff is recommending approval of H 2025-29 to Meridian City Council as recommended. 1 point of clarification just to the staff report, a little bit of a Scribner's error in the first finding. 17, it's consistent with all statutes of LUPA, all 17 statutes as written out, followed by the 18 in parentheses. As of today, it's 17. We did evaluate all 18 in the staff report. I think it's pages 11 and 12 in the staff report. It will be 18 as of July 1, 2025, due to a recent legislative change, which adds an additional criteria that we are required to plan for in our comprehensive planning efforts. So next steps, this will be followed, as I mentioned earlier, with a request to the City Council to hear the request. That would be followed by an application to Ada County to go through their formal process to reestablish the city's area of impact. I'm happy to stand for any questions the commission may have.
Okay, so since the city is the applicant, we don't have an applicant to come forward. Is there anybody, do the commissioners have any questions for staff at this time? Do we have anybody signed up for public testimony?
Madam Chair, no one has signed up.
Okay, anything else you'd like to add before we close the public hearing?
The only point I'd like to add is the property owner of the 5.06 acres that are proposed to be added to the area of impacts and future land use map is present. They may wish to speak, or just as a point of order.
Would the homeowner like to speak? Who is the homeowner?
Jack Franz?
All right, Mr. Franz, is that you? Would you like to speak at all about the? Okay, thank you. And he's in agreement?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Perot?
question for staff. First, let me say, I can't describe how far my eyes rolled back in my head when I saw this, because I remember the many painstaking months of CUNA and Meridian determining where their boundary lines, their area of impact lines were going to be. So my question is so now this goes back into Ada County's comprehensive plan, into their future land use map, is my understanding. It'll be removed from ours and put back into theirs. So then in the future, it's possible that the line that was created for area of impact for CUNA and Meridian could shift again. Is that correct? And if so, how is CUNA approaching this?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Perot. That is correct. I believe those parcels that are here, at least the majority, do appear to be within 2 miles from City of CUNA city limits. I don't know if all 38 of those in that area. I don't know if all 38 of those in that area are included, or all 38 of those parcels proposed to be removed from the city's area of impact are within 2 miles or not. I believe a good portion of them are. It's possible that the city of CUNA could look to include them as well. I don't have an answer as to where they're at with their process as it stands today. I would draw your attention back to it's not just the 2 miles. Those areas would need to be included as part of their capital improvement planning programs and so forth. They would need to plan for services in those areas.
Can I get a motion to close the public hearing, please?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second to close the public hearing for item number 2025-0029. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. It seems very straightforward. It looks like legislature made some changes for the impact areas that we need to comply with. I know that the city of Meridian probably went to great lengths to incorporate it, and now we're putting it back out, and maybe that will come to us again at the future, but right now we need to comply with the legislature's request for impact areas. Any other comments about this application before we make a motion?
Chair,
Commissioner Perot?
I just have one more question. So as our city limits expand southward, how often is this 2 mile radius reassessed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Perot, state statute requires that we reevaluate the area of city impact every 5 years, as has been amended. I do believe it can be amended more often. I'm going off memory. So if there were a need to take a look at it within a few years, if conditions change significantly, it could be something that the city looks at in a more near time frame. And as previously stated, just to point out on there, the city does anticipate continuing to plan for these areas outside of the area of impact in its other planning efforts, just not as shown on the future land use map.
Madam Chair, if I can almost reiterate what Carl said, but I think he covered it well. I think we'll monitor that. And I don't expect it to be 5 years. Depending on what annexations occur over the next coming months, we could look to renegotiate it with Ada County sooner than that. is the hope. Like you said, we spent quite a bit of resources including this area. I'm hoping this is a temporary thing where we comply with state code, but we come back relatively in short order and reincorporate it in our area of city impact.
After considering all staff, applicant, and public testimony, I move to recommend file number H 2025-0029 as presented during the hearing of June 26, 2025, with no modifications.
Second.
It's been moved and second to approve the comprehensive plan map amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Carol, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is item number ZOA 2025-0001 for a UDC text amendment. And we will begin with the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Give me one moment here and I'll get things pulled up here. There we go. That's better. So again, another city application before you this evening. This is this year's 2025 code changes. Not sure if we'll be back in front of you with other ones later in the year, but at least that is the plan after we get these ones moving forward. But I think as the commission knows, the city set out with a group of stakeholders and community support members and stakeholders and groups of developers where we formulated a UDC focus group, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. And we get together once a year. The city tracks these changes on a spreadsheet. We take suggestions from our development partners as well and members from the community. And we formulate these code changes, and city code requires that you are the recommending body and city council is the decision-making body on code changes. This is one of the only times that most of the other code changes just go to city council and they act on it, and it's presented typically by that department or legal department. But the planning and the community development, the planning division takes the lead on UDC code changes with those various partners. I won't go through all of the details, but Caleb and I are actually tag teaming this or partnering some of the part of this this evening. He'll primarily cover flex space and secondary dwelling units, which under the current code provisions in front of you or the proposed changes, we're changing that to accessory dwelling. So you may see it in the list as secondary dwelling, but moving forward, we hope to change that to accessory dwelling so it aligns with the building code. I'll spend time on drive-throughs, maybe some home occupations if you have time for it, private streets, and then fencing. We also have Lacey Oy, who is our code enforcement supervisor. She is part of that group, and she also lends a lot of valuable insight to these code changes because she's the one out there explaining it to the many residents that have questions when she's out there serving violations or trying to educate the public on how our processes work. So I do appreciate everyone being here to support and answer any questions you may have. I also mentioned to you that one change that's come about is Caleb and I were actually in front of City Council about 6 weeks ago before the application was transmitted at a workshop, and we shared these code changes with them as well. That's one of their requests, that they wanted to get in front of that and look at these code changes ahead of time as well so they could digest those as well, which I think was a great suggestion. So I'm sure they're eager to see what you guys do on the changes tonight. And as this moves to City Council, they'll be interested in what you have to say. And I'm looking forward to that discussion with them as well. So like I mentioned to you, we're not going to hit on all of these. In my staff report, typically when we do code changes, it's tip to tail. So this round of code changes, we started with chapter 1 and we ended it with chapter 5. So there are a total of 7 chapters in our Unified Development Code. So we touched 5 out of 7 this time, which is pretty typical when I come before this body. And as you know, usually it starts out as a smaller code change, but by the time I get the application to you, based on the discussions that we have with all the stakeholders in the UDC focus group, it typically morphs into something bigger, which isn't a bad thing. I think what we're presenting to you tonight, I'm pretty proud of where we started, from where it started to where we are tonight. I feel pretty good with what we're going to be sharing with you. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of go through these very quickly and just go down and start right out the gate with drive-throughs. And that's something that I know we've talked about over the last 5 years, particularly since COVID. And we've seen quite a few drive-throughs, mostly fast food restaurants with drive-throughs, but it's a full gamut. And I think, as this body knows, not all drive-throughs are created equal. And so really this particular code change was probably the one that we broke off into, got with some industry experts, looked at other city codes, and then came up with a mesh of what we felt would work well for the city of Meridian. So as this body knows, typically when there's a drive-through within 300 feet of a residence or another drive-through, it's an automatic conditional use permit. In this particular case, we're trying to make drive-throughs what we call a principally permitted use. So less hearings, but having more express standards so that we can approve them at a staff level versus it coming to this body. It's not that we want to take work away from you, but at the same time, we want to make things efficient as well for our applicants and make sure that we have a solid code in place. So this particular code change does not, there will still be instances where a CUP will be required. We have not removed the requirement for that 300-foot radius to a residential use. So that will remain in place. But what's really unique about this is if we do have more specific design standards, but if you look at number 4, if an applicant can't meet those design standards, then they have the ability to come to you through a conditional use process, and you guys can take that under consideration whether or not they can eliminate an escape lane or do something different based on their operational needs and not necessarily, or how they operate versus on the specifics of the code. So I think there's going to be some not only greater flexibility for the city, but also for you as a recommending body on conditional use permits, or a decision-making body on conditional use permits, I should say. So in working with the UDC focus group, we broke drive-throughs into different categories. So we have a tier 1, a tier 2, tier 3, because we know they're not all alike. And then there's some criteria for how they're classified in this definition. So that's one criteria, or one way to get there. And then also we made it clear that stacking lanes have to be away from a residential district, at least 20 feet, again, consistent with a landscape buffer required by code. We still are keeping a stacking lane requirement in for an escape lane. And that's something that we recently had a discussion with the UDC focus group. We haven't quite figured out what we want to do, if get rid of it or keep it. For now, we think there's an importance to keep it. I know City Council has some interest in that topic as well. So again, as we transition through the public hearing process, would love to get your insight on a requirement for an escape lane. Caleb and I talked about it quite a bit as well, and we feel like item 4 addresses that topic. If someone does not want to comply with the escape lane standard, they have the ability to go through a conditional use process and have that discussion with you and see if they can explain their operation characteristics and see if an escape lane isn't necessary. One other portion about this code that I like about it is it does speak to a minimum width for the drive-through or the stacking lanes, which is 20 feet total. One for the drive-through stacking lane and one for the escape lane. At a minimum, it has to be 20 feet wide. And then we do put a minimum stacking lane capacity for specific tiers. So again, your tier 2 and your tier 3s are probably going to be your fast food restaurants with ordering boards and menu boards. And then tier 3 are your drive-throughs with the dual drive-through lanes. Again, A tier 3 could go through a staff level approval if it met all the criteria. I know when we shared this with the council, they asked staff if tier 3 would be conditional use permits. And I said, the way it's drafted currently, we are not proposing that in this code change. So anyways, that's our requirements for drive-throughs. Certainly happy to stand for questions unless you want to hold your questions and then continue. Have Caleb and I go through our list of high-level changes with you.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, let's go subject by subject, because by the time we get to number 5, we might forget number 1. Commissioner Perot.
Thank you. I have a question about D3. So the way that the text is stricken, I'm trying to follow it. So it's, the stacking lane shall not be located within 20 feet of any residential district? Is that correct?
That's correct.
That number of feet isn't changing, right? It's just clarifying how it's written here. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so the change is from 10 to 20. So the strikeout, so anytime we give you code changes, the underline is new and then the strikeout is the current and then the underline is the new.
It looks like it's going from 120 feet to 20 feet.
I can see that. Yeah, that's how they like it when they go ahead and make the changes. The publishers have a specific criteria that we have to meet.
Okay, any other questions about drive-throughs at this time? Okay, let's go to the next subject.
It looks like the next subject here is secondary dwelling. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Hood, and he can give you the background and what we're trying to achieve with this code change.
Thanks, Bill. Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you for having me this evening. I will tackle ADUs as they're going to be known going forward, not secondary dwelling units. And maybe before I jump into some of the things that are on the screen now, when Bill was doing his introduction, he actually had there's some impacts to our definitions. I won't go through those, but basically we are adding primary to a lot of them to talk about the primary structure that's on there, typically a single family residential dwelling unit as being the primary. And then we're taking the secondary language and again, making that accessory, but it is still ancillary or secondary to the primary. So I'll also just say before I jump into some of the more detailed specific standards for what constitutes an ADU, there are some impacts as well to Title 8. And like Bill mentioned at the beginning, Title 11 is unique in that it has 2 bodies that actually review and approve that, right? Planning and zoning makes a recommendation to City Council. Title 8 is not subject to that same process. However, we have Brian McClure here, who's going to run through some of the ancillary related changes that he needs to go forward to City Council concurrently with these UDC provisions. And you are actually in Title 8 and 11, you're charged with looking at some of those appeals. When someone appeals an address or a suite number, doesn't happen very often, but it happens from time to time. So we thought it was a good opportunity to bring him along to explain some of that. So if you do see those in the future, you have a little bit of that background information. So again, the definitions are largely the same. Some of that also is like we did with drive-throughs even. Look, a lot of things in our code we're proud of, but it didn't maybe originate with us. We're not too proud to steal from other communities. So ADUs are a pretty typical term used throughout the country. And some of the standards you're about to see are, us seeing what other communities are doing and picking and choosing the ones that are right for Meridian, but also evaluating and saying, why do they do this? What do they have? So with that kind of background into this, I think I'm just going to start with D. A, B, and C are largely, there's some change there, but they're just to definition really and what they are. That an accessory dwelling unit really does need to be accessory to the primary dwelling and that you need a permit to have one. D, E, and G, the proposed D, E, and G aren't really changing substantively either for the most part, but they got a lot of discussion at the UDC focus group. The owner occupancy piece of that is debated throughout the country. If I live out of state 7 months of the year, but I call this home, does that count? The dirty little secret is we aren't checking on that too terribly much, right? At all, really. If someone complains and says, hey, I think there's two renters here, we may investigate something like that. It is kind of on the honor system, but the intent is that an owner live in one or the other at least the majority of the year. And again, that's something that not everyone agreed on, but this is where we landed and thought best for our community is to have some oversight of the property by an owner in either the ADU or the primary dwelling unit. That really isn't changing though. That is our current standard, just some wordsmithing there to make it a little bit cleaner, if you will. And then on E, the location, again, nothing really is changing with location, but there was a lot of talk about over the last few years, actually, about the location. Should we give some, I'll use the word variance, it's not really a variance, but some allowance for setbacks? Should these be able to encroach into a rear setback closer than your primary dwelling or a side or even a front? So we had some conversations about that, but at the end of the day, the location needs to comply with the setbacks of the underlying zoning district. That's where we landed as a group. That's the proposal to you this evening. Again, that does vary throughout the country from neighborhood to neighborhood. Sometimes you can have these in front of your primary dwelling or encroaching in other setbacks. That's not where we landed with this. And then G, I believe is the other one, parking. Again, this can be seen as a negative for communities that are looking to install these. It takes up more area, and we don't have a lot of larger lots in Meridian that can even accommodate these. You account for setbacks, garages, everything else. Now you need a pad for your up to 900 square foot ADU and a parking pad that's at least 20 by 10. You cut a lot of the lots out of the market. You can't do one. So we had a lot of conversation about that. But again, at the end of the day, where we landed as a group was we think the community character of a neighborhood is important to have on-site parking, not on-street parking. You can park on street if that's allowed, but you need to have a dedicated spot on your property for the dwelling unit. I will say, however, though, that's a combined number. So it's number of bedrooms combined. If you got 2 in your ADU and 3 in the primary residence, that's 5, and you would need to meet whatever that requirement is. So it's a combined number. So could trigger more parking. If you already have a 3-car garage and 3 parking pads, you may be able to just get away with building the ADU and still counting the parking for that, because in whole on the parcel, you have enough parking for that. So again, no real changes to those, but those were kind of the sticking points where we had a lot of dialogue on those things. The other ones I think I want to highlight just relatively quickly are the proposed J and the new L. These do need to be constructed on a foundation. Historically, we've had some questions with that. And so we are clarifying that to be classified and permitted as an accessory dwelling unit, it does need to be connected to utilities and on a foundation. Part of the discussion with utilities was, do they have to have their own separate independent utilities? And as you'll see in what's proposed, we landed on no. So you can use the utilities of the primary dwelling, so trash service, electrical, water, whatever, but you have to be using those services. You can get a separate service, but you don't have to have a separate service. So, but a lot of conversation about that. And then again, just to kind of close this out, and Brian will talk a little bit more about this, but we consulted with fire, code, building. It just overall, at the end of the day, made sense to give these a standalone separate address. So we will be addressing these going forward, assuming this goes through at City Council. So I think those are the things I wanted to touch on regarding still currently secondary dwelling units, proposed to be accessory dwelling units going forward.
Caleb, has the city gotten a lot of requests about ADUs? I know there was some press about it a couple years ago, maybe even less, where it was a mobile unit. I don't know if it was RV, but it was something on a trailer. It wasn't on a foundation, and it kind of made the press a little bit, which kind of spurred the conversation again for affordable housing here in our community. But are you getting, as a city as a whole, getting requests? Is this why we're kind of revising this portion of our code, because we're seeing that happen more often?
Yes, Madam Chair, certainly the interest is peaked more over the last Bill said 5 years for drive-through, so we'll just go with that. I don't know, over the last recent history anyways, we are getting more and more inquiries of that. With the cost of housing and some call it a crisis even, it is a lever we can pull a little bit to kind of encourage. Again, that's where we have these conversations about location and parking. Every time you regulate it more and more, you see people out of that potential market though. So that is something where we struggled with quite a bit, was how much do we open this up? And how much do we kind of preserve and protect neighborhood character that's existing? So that was kind of the push and pull. But yeah, there's definitely more interest. I can even just tell you, anecdotally, I don't have a number, but monthly, if not weekly, we get inquiries about this from our staff, and we are working with these our residents to figure out what we can do with the current standards and talking to them even about what's being proposed. So yeah, certainly more interest. It's tough though. Actually, Brian did some research. It's been 3 years now. At that time, we had about 40,000 dwelling units in Meridian, and I think it was around 10% of them could even fit one on their property.
Right.
And we don't know how many of that 10% even wanted to have one. It's a pretty small percentage. We're not going to solve the housing crisis with these changes.
ADUs. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, just add a little bit to your question is the city actually has a separate ADU permit now that they apply through the building department. So we even created a separate record so we can keep better track of these as they go forward, because a lot of times that's kind of the caveat with this too, is that we're trying to align our code with building code. That's step one, and then determine what do we call these. Is it really a remodel expansion of an existing home versus a true ADU? And that's why we separated it out and tried to provide that clarifying language in the code that Caleb shared with you to try to align with that. So we know we can, when someone asks us how many have we permitted, we can run a report and share that information with the community, because we are seeing more and more of these permits being submitted to the city.
Commissioners, any questions about ADUs before we go to the next subject?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Smith?
I do have one regarding owner occupancy. And it's kind of what happens, say you're in compliance and then, you decide the owner decides they want to move, or they're temporarily moving or something like that. Are they able to still rent out the entire property as a whole, just not to two separate renters? Or does the ADU have to then be taken down?
So Madam Chair, Commissioner, so a similar example, if I live in the home and I'm going to move away forever, maybe even, but I want my kid to stay there. They don't technically own it, but it's my kid. Is that an owner occupancy if they're an heir or by blood, or they're going to inherit it eventually, or those types of things? We haven't run through all of those potential scenarios. I don't think to qualify as an ADU, you would need to meet these qualifications. We haven't gone to the point of, okay, you have to deconstruct it, raise the ADU necessarily, but in theory, I guess it could come to that. I don't necessarily see us being that heavy-handed, but in theory, I guess, yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pearl?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My favorite subject. We've been talking about this how many years, gentlemen? I'm very excited to see these come about because it's been a long, long conversation. So good job on everything. I just have a couple of questions on wording. Under 4.3.12, when we're talking about the permits required under C, it says that they shall obtain a permit prior to building, placing, or maintaining an ADU on any property. Can you give some more description on the definition of maintaining? When does that start? When does that stop? How does that look?
No, I don't know that I can actually. So this was done, and on all of the UDC changes, just sort of as an aside, we're done with legal present. And that is, I believe, one that Miss Emily Kane came up with. So, and she's not here tonight, so I hate to put anyone else on the spot that way, but that is something that our legal staff certainly the placed and constructed, I get the maintained may just be a conversion piece, because we get a lot of the inquiries are actually taking a garage area or garage-like area and converting it type of a thing. So then you're maintaining a living quarters, even though you may have not converted anything with permits or whatever. So
Could
I'm
it-
speculating there a little bit, but that's some of, I believe, the intent. No way, shape, or form can someone be living, should anyone be living there without the proper permits.
Could I,
Yeah.
could I add to that? What I would think, it's not maintaining as in maintenance, but I would assume that if we in code enforcement was notified that someone was already living in one that had been built, then we would ask them to get a permit. So it would be as maintaining the structure that was already there as opposed to it being placed or built, but that someone was already utilizing it. And then we ask them to get the permit to make sure it goes through all of the proper channels.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have another question, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you very much. My next question is actually farther up on the definitions for dwelling and for townhouse or detached, single-family detached. It says that the dwelling unit is located on a separate property, so it's a separate taxable parcel, correct? I'm wondering if, I'm getting technical here, but I kind of feel like separate property is really too broad of a term. I feel like we should narrow that down and just say, you know, separate taxable parcel or separate subdivided piece, or I don't know. I just, it seems kind of generic to me.
So I think I can respond to that. Sorry, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Perot. You know, I appreciate the wordsmithing there a little bit. We do have definitions for property though too, and even some of the ones you just put out there. You know, you can go create a tax parcel with the county, and we don't really want to go there because a parcel doesn't make it a legal parcelable for building type of thing. And not everything we have in Meridian is part of a subdivision either. You have section ground land that you can do it. So it is intentional to have property. What we don't have on the screen is we do have a definition of what is a parcel, a property, a lot. So it does all sort of work together and tie together. Again, I appreciate you looking and even the comments and questions and let's make sure that it reads the way we want it to and intend it to. The last comment I'll just have on that is we aren't proposing to change that. That's been the way it's read, separate property for quite some time. So that isn't underlined or strike through. I can verify with our legal team again, but I believe this is the way they'd prefer it read for those reasons.
Okay, any other comments about ADUs before we go to the next subject? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, it looks like I'm up again, so sorry, you're stuck with me for one more. And first, I think I'll apologize. I've done a pretty poor job of marketing these changes to our development partners and with everyone else that's read it. So hopefully this presentation will help clarify some of that. I did discuss and try to explain these with assistance from others. It wasn't just me, but I am the lead on this one. We did go to the Building Contractors Association of Southwest Idaho, obviously the UDC focus group and others. But there still seems to be some confusion and even concern over the draft standard. So we do have 4 letters. Some of them came in two of them came in just this afternoon. So I would call your attention to those in the packet. Again, if you checked the packet even at 4 o'clock, you would have missed one of them. So, but there are 4 letters. They're all very similar, and I'll address those. I think the first one that I can hopefully just put to bed early, 3 out of the 4, I believe. I don't think all 4 of them talked about parking. But actually, at one point in time, we did have a 500 square foot parking. So the E that Bill was just kind of hovering over, a 500 square foot parking per And as you can see, we've had 1,000, but at one point in time, we did have a version that talked about having a 500 square foot. So I think that puts at least the parking concern that is in some of those letters to bed. This is more consistent with a hybrid industrial commercial type of a standard for parking. I think the other thing I want to just start off with is the definition of flex, because I think that's where we can kind of get things confused sometimes. Flex is just a land use designation or a land use definition when we're looking at a myriad of options that property could be. And I want to just start with the definition of what it means to be a flex space building. So flex space is defined in the UDC as the use of a building or portion thereof for small scale warehousing and or light industry with associated office and or retail showroom space, period. Flexibility in the use of interior spaces and low scale, attractive exterior appearance characterize flex buildings. That's on the books. We aren't proposing to change that. That's how we generally define what a flex building is. The intent of flex buildings is in the name. We do intend for them to offer some flexibility in how the square footage is allocated for different uses. And it is appropriate in a lot of situations. However, the ratio of warehousing and light industry to office and retail is critical in both establishing and maintaining business neighborhood integrity and meeting some of the city's goals for targeted industries. Some control through minimum and maximum square footage allowances is necessary for the stability of areas that may tend to have more retail or office than envisioned for those that are like in industrial areas, or more industrial warehousing than envisioned in planned commercial or mixed use areas. So the letters really speak to it being requiring too much office or retail showroom type of a side, but it could be the other way. You could have someone that wants to go in an industrial district and really is a retailer, and they're saying, hey, I want to be in this district because it's cheap land and let me go there. No, the flex building is to allow some flexibility, but really where we're seeing flex buildings a lot are kind of those tweener zones where it's commercial or retail areas. It's okay to have some warehousing, and we can even call you a flex building. It doesn't mean you have to be necessarily a retailer. And we had a conversation this last week as staff, even where we had some corporate offices want to come in for office equipment, and they want to have their corporate offices, pretty substantial retail component, as well as some backstock warehousing for it. And we talked about it. It's like, okay, they're bringing offices and retail. Do we call them flex? Do we call them retail? Do we call them office? I mean, it could be any one of them because it's all about a third. And again, that's kind of the intent with flex, is to allow some flexibility, but not to allow industrial in commercial and just call it flex, right? If that makes sense. Or the other way around. That's why we have a cap on the amount of retail office you can have, because we don't want to see those retailers go in industrial zone. So some flexibility. The other thing I just want to point out, we thought we were being helpful here, as right now it requires 30% in all zones everywhere all the time to qualify as flex. And we're like, okay, that maybe we don't need as much of that like in industrial zones. We can have those pare back. But in CC, Community Business District, we thought having a higher percentage of that building be allocated for, again, non-industrial warehousing type of uses, office, showroom, retail, whatever, made sense for that character of that zone, of that business park, of that whatever. So I think just within that, what I wanted to say is we're definitely as staff willing to work and understand what that business model is and their floor plan and fit you in a nice classification. We gotta call you something. And flex is a nice one where you're doing a little bit of everything and you're primarily, warehousing even, but you do have that component. Other uses though, that I'll just call out real quick that are similar and often get confused with are wholesale sales, warehouses, light industry, food and beverage products processing, building materials, garden equipment, and supplies. Those are all separate things that you could also do, but they're a different land use than flex. There's a very specific, definition and these standards that I'll jump into here for just a minute. So again, we hear the industry, we understand that. I think there's a little bit of a, push and pull there of, yes, we're trying to be flexible, but not to the extent where we just get, 100,000 square foot warehouse buildings in our CC district. So you can see the changes are actually pretty straightforward. It wasn't rocket science. This is again where I think we looked at a couple of other codes, but we just said, hey, how about 5%, as you go up or down the ladder on zoning. So it's certainly not scientific, but it is thought out. Understand it doesn't go quite as far as again, some folks would like it to go, but we think this is appropriate for our community. Again, there's not a laundry list of changes. Two kind of changes of substance that are more, it's adding more flexibility to the definition of flex than currently on the books. But with that, I think I'll pause for any questions or comments or discussion or whatever you want to do. But that's essentially where we landed on flex space.
So in a flex situation, if I'm a landscaper and, I'm putting in sprinklers and to me, flex has always been, when I've been in the business community, has always been kind of, I've always seen it synonymous as temporary. A flex, you could be there multiple years, but I'm not buying a building because maybe I don't know if my business model is going to work. So what you're telling me is if I'm a landscaper and I have a bunch of hose and I want a showroom where I can show my cool sprinkler things, I have an office where I have a receptionist and a little warehouse in the back holding my hoses. Flex space wouldn't be for me because you have a separate designation specifically for landscapers?
So it's a very good question, Madam Chair. Potentially, it kind of depends on your floor plan and your site, right? A lot of landscapers, we actually call a contractor's yard. It kind of depends on what you're doing and how much of the site is used for what purpose. How much are you really retailing versus wholesaling? How big is your warehouse? How big is your yard? How big is your parking area? So there's a lot of things that factor in, and we don't have, well, we may have a definition for a landscape something, but basically contractor or landscape contractor would maybe the definition in your hypothetical. Could be flex, could be. That's what I'm saying. There's a lot of, wiggle room or quite a bit of wiggle room, but when one of the qualifications to be flex though is you need to have at least whatever percentage, depending on the zone, of an office showroom component. If you don't have that, then you won't, then we got to look for something else. We got to call you, some other classification. So that's why we do have these standards as some metric within defining a flex building. You need to have an office showroom space.
Okay. I guess one of the other examples I wanted to ask about was, we're starting to see more manufacturing and retail of some food service within kind of industrial and flex space spots. So for example, say I have a gelato store and I want to make it there, but I also want to have a retail component in my showroom. Is that eligible for like a flex? Is that one of the reasons flex space is there? Because it's a small business that I can no longer cottage out of my house and I want to have some more space, but I also need a commercial type of thing happening?
Yeah, Madam Chair, it may be eligible. It may not even be the best, fit for you. Again, depending on what if you really think that your retail side of that is going to be successful and you're setting aside a good chunk, but you're still just making your ice cream or gelato or whatever you said in the back, it may be better to call you a restaurant, for Central District health purposes. You may want to be classified as something else. So we factor all those things in. But again, I think some of the genesis of flex was more to your point of a mom and pa wanting to do the next step and kind of have a dedicated space where they could still mess with wood or do whatever. And that's why we don't have a square footage on small scale, but that's in the definition. I mean, it is meant for, maybe I have a couple roll-up doors, but it is a smaller space, however you want to kind of define that. It's not 20 roll-up doors with docks and everything. That's not flex, right? I mean, unless the building's huge, I don't think you would qualify for that. So that's where I kind of want to just, the definition and what we're trying to do, that's going to be warehousing or distribution. That's primarily what you're doing. So now if you added some corporate offices to that, now we can talk flex potentially, but even that square footage though, small scale.
Okay. Any other questions on flex space before we move to the next subject? Okay, thank you very much.
Next item I just want to quickly touch on, I know it wasn't part of the 4 that I talked about, was just because we're on specific use standards, is home occupation. So I think the commission's aware you can't operate a business from your home if you meet a certain criteria. Well, we are broadening that a little bit this time, this round of code changes. So essentially, we have some residents in Meridian that like to have outdoor swimming pools, and they like to do outdoor lessons, swimming lessons from their home. And currently, the way the code is written, they're not allowed. You're not allowed to have any outdoor activity associated with a home occupation. And this went before city council, and city council directed staff to come up with code changes to allow that type of use. So really, that's what this is attempting to do. Again, this was shared with the council back last year when I did the last round of code changes. So we have added that as an allowed use for outdoor swim lessons for 6 or fewer students. And then the other important portion of that is the fact that, again, it's capped at a certain time of year. Obviously, you can't swim in an outdoor swimming pool unless it's well heated throughout the whole year. So there is a limit. They don't need to renew their permit every year. Just their approved home occupation permit would allow them to operate between those months.
Okay, very good.
But pretty straightforward.
Madam
Any
Chair.
questions about that?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Smith?
Just out of curiosity, why swimming specifically? And has there been any discussion of, I mean, say I'm a basketball coach, I have a hoop in my backyard or something. Is there a reason swimming specifically came up and that's considered?
Yes, and that was the discussion that we had with council when we were hesitant to change the code, because again, if we weren't so specific, we could end up with someone having a batting cage in their backyard, and you're hearing people hitting baseballs throughout the day, and basketball court and all of those things. Those were, again, like Caleb says, like the home occupations or the accessory use permits, we're trying to maintain neighborhood character. And we feel like if this is a limited amount of children or a very specific purpose, that does that. Not saying you won't have noise associated with it, but the other part of that is we allow in-home daycares with 6 or fewer. So even if kids are playing in the backyard, that's kind of how we found the nexus with allowing the swim lessons versus a daycare use. And that's why the 6 or fewer aligns with also the daycare standards.
Madam Chair, if I can just add one more thing that I recall from last year is there are some swimming pools, but not a whole lot in Meridian, and a need for swim lessons. So there was a niche there that some could serve. Basketball courts are a little more prevalent, and you can go hold that at a park or whatever, but with only having a couple of public swim pools and those types of things, it was like, we want kids to learn how to swim, and if we can even to some degree encourage them, still have neighborhood character, but this was one of those lessons types of things where we thought there was a safety thing, and for people that have backyard pools and are willing to do some lessons. Anyways, that was part of the conversation too.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wish I had it 20 years ago because I had to take my kids to Boise. Because the only other option was Meridian Pool back in the day. And they were booked up. So I can only imagine with our increase in population, having that flexibility, especially with subdivisions having pools, having these kids have lessons is a good move overall for safety. Okay, so home occupation, any other questions before we move to the next subject? All right, Bill, what do you got?
We have fences. So again, this is a joint effort between planning and code and legal. As Caleb mentioned, as we can attest over the last couple of years, we've gotten some interesting fencing showing up in our community. And so this is our attempt at what we call, this is something unusual that I haven't done, but it's called repeal and replace. So rather than giving you a bunch of strike through underline text to read through, this is actually going to repeal the existing fence code and replace it with the new code. So it's just a way that's allowed under the law, the state statutes, there we can effectively modify the code without strike through underline format by introducing a new code. This essentially takes a lot of the existing code that we currently have in place. It reorders it, restructures it with some additional wordsmithing from code enforcement and our legal department. But it also takes it one step further where it allows somebody to do some decorative features in their backyard. Currently, the way the fence code is written and where people have found loopholes in the fence code is they may put up a fence, put up trellises, and then they 8-foot trellis in the side yard, and they think it's a decorative feature, and they put vegetation on it, and they don't understand that that can be construed as an extension of their fence. Or we've had code enforcement cases where someone's put lattice on the top of their existing fence or another lattice adjacent to it so they can raise the height of the fence. And again, just because it may not be attached, or even if it is or adjacent, it's still considered an extension of the fence. And currently in the residential district, you can't exceed 6 feet in height. And that's where we see a lot of these issues coming up for us is, so this code tries to do that. Again, we've thread that needle to say 6-foot fence is allowed. And if you do these things, it's something else, or it's allowed if it's a decorative feature, and we put parameters on that. The other part of the fence code is just updating our graphics. So I wanted to share this with you. So a lot of times residents come to us and they want to know what type of fencing they can put on their property. So we do have graphics in the fence code, in the code currently. This was just a way that we could modernize that moving forward and share all the different scenarios someone could face when they go to erect a fence on their property. I would mention to the commission that we are going to tweak this a little bit. Currently on some of the graphics here, the way the code is currently being presented to you tonight, there is a requirement for a 45-degree angle when a side yard fence abuts the front yard of an adjacent property. The code doesn't explain whether it needs to be 45 with a 6-foot fence, or it just says a fence has to go in at 45. So we feel like there's an opportunity that we should probably clarify that language in the fence code that says 6-foot fence needs to be 6-foot solid needs to be a 45-degree for visibility. But if it was a 3 or 4-foot, 3-foot solid or a 4-foot open vision fence, that it would be allowed to run along the property line. So we'll get that clarified and update that graphic, but at least wanted to share that with you and point it out in code, because I did have a chance to look at that before I came to the hearing tonight. And that's this number 5 here in front of you. You can see here, it just says fence. So we'll put some sideboards on that and then update that figure as well. The other piece that's a little bit different than currently in code, and we've been dealing with this issue, is currently the fence code so when someone goes to construct fencing on their property, we measure the fence setback from property line, not sidewalk. So that's causes some issues too. And then what compounds it even more is if you have a corner property, the code says your fence has to be in 10 feet from the property line. So you never get to truly use your side yard because your fencing's 10 feet in. And so then neighbors are walking the dogs in the evening, or you buy this corner lot thinking you have this great side yard and you find out you can't use it. And then people are putting up fences in the wrong spot. And then we're going out there knocking on their doors, telling them to tear the fencing down. So this particular code gives greater flexibility to that standard. So in this particular case, what you can see here, if there's a detached sidewalk adjacent to the street, then we're going to allow the homeowner to put their fence 2 feet from the sidewalk. So rather than 10, and we're going to define the setback from the sidewalk, not the property line. Unless there's no sidewalk, then property line would still apply. But most of the residential subdivisions, there's sidewalks, either attached or detached. And so if there's an attached sidewalk, the graphic down here below says you can go up to 5 feet. So we're giving them 5 additional feet. And the reason why we landed on that is, one, if it's 2 feet from the sidewalk, it allows someone to get a lawnmower between the fence and the sidewalk. Or also if you're walking in the evening or biking, you have some elbow room there and you don't have to worry about hitting the fence or doing damage to somebody's property. It just gives a little bit more space, and that allows some more comfort to that pedestrian or bicyclist on the sidewalk. But really, those are the draft changes. I know Lacey has a lot more history with fence code issues, but I think we were able to get on the same page with these changes, and they feel pretty good that it's going to be hopefully easier enforcement on their end to explain those standards.
Any questions on fencing?
Madam Chair,
Smith?
one question on the definition. It looks like there's some of the language is struck that specifies it as manufactured materials. Would that make, for example, vegetation, say shrubbery or hedges, fence? And if so, is that the intention?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, we do not regulate landscaping on buildable lots, so that's still in play. So you're right, just because we're trying to maintain visibility from people backing out of their driveways, or they still can put up multiple shrubs there and block those open vision fencing. But again, the city code does not require landscaping on buildable lots, only common lots.
Thank you.
If I can maybe just add to that a little bit though. So what Bill said is correct, but manufactured faux, that was some of the issue, and I'm getting into Lacey's business a little bit, but we're getting some pretty creative folks. That's not a fence, that's not a screen, that's not a wall. So that is a lot of what the intent is of the definitions, is to clarify. You can't put up a blue tarp and say that that's okay, that it is a fence or isn't a fence. So we went back and forth a lot on what defines a fence or a screen or a wall and those types of things. So, yeah, I probably shouldn't have even said anything, but that is something we saw quite a bit, was some of the manufactured ivy type of things. We wouldn't regulate it if it were living, but when it's a manufactured material, depending on where it's placed, it can constitute fencing material because it's screening potentially.
Commissioner Peru?
Are we seeing a lot of this issue with line of sight problems, like around corners? Obviously, if you have a 4-foot fence at a 45-degree angle and somebody puts up a 8-foot arborvitae, you've just lost your line of sight. You know, that 45-degree angle is useless at that point. So is that kind of what we're trying to prohibit?
So I'll maybe give the first stab at that, and feel free to jump in. That wasn't the nexus necessarily for some of these changes, but that has been a concern that's been brought up, particularly in some of these corner lots on a side yard where they're bringing a 6-foot fence up, and now someone's driveway is only 5 feet off of that. Backing out of your driveway, you can't see around the fence to see if any car's coming to back out. So yes, that was thought about and is a result of some of these changes. It's not necessarily why we're making the changes, though.
Okay. Next subject?
Well, last topic for my portion of the presentation, then we can certainly open it up to questions or even public comments, as this is a public hearing, is private streets. Yes, and this one actually wasn't even our radar. But we met with some of our UDC focus group members, and they had expressed a need to change or modify this section of our code. And like Caleb said to you on his portion with the accessory dwelling units, this was one that got a lot of feedback and a lot of conversation around it. Because as we know, you know, for longevity, public streets are better than private streets, right? For maintenance, we all pay that. There's taxes. There's a way to maintain the road. Where we're hesitant with private streets, from a city's perspective, is the cost and maintenance of those over time. But again, staff was willing to open the door, crack the door open a little bit, and allow some more flexibility to use private streets, particularly if it's infill or plan unit development. Because that's really where, again, if you're going to infill, as you know, can be very tricky. There may be enclaves in the city where there's no street stub to it, or may not necessitate a public street, or the cross section of a public street's too wide and it doesn't make it feasible to do an infill project because you've taken up the property with a roadway, similar to the discussion we had earlier this evening. So we've got to be able to have some flexibility in the code to allow certain these in certain instances. So currently, the way the code's written is you can do, it's discouraged to do private streets unless it's a MU or gated development. That's how it's written. Doesn't say you can't do it. It just says if you're going to do it and if we're going to entertain it, we may be supportive if it's, you have those two options. If it's commercial or multifamily, we typically would require private street for addressing purposes because of the size of the development. We want to make sure it's for emergency services. A lot of those provisions are staying in place with this code change. But we realize there are some holes or some gaps that we need to fill, or at least make it a little bit more flexible. So this code doesn't say you can't do a MU or gate it. We just took it out that it's not that. That's not the only purpose for it. And then again, it's one of those where we looked at other code sections like we typically do. We don't reinvent code. We look and see what other communities are doing in the area. And so some of this wordsmith was from those code sections and then going back and forth with the UDC focus group. So again, I can see this tool being used more for infill, gated communities still, and possibly commercial developments where maybe Ada County or the fire department or emergency services need something named for addressing purposes to get for public safety. That's really how this tool is meant to use, and I think that will continue to be the case. The other portion of this is trying to have standards that what applies to a residential development versus a commercial development, and trying to separate those two things out as well. So currently, the way the standards are drafted, again, residential, you're going to have your own design standards that you have to meet. And then in commercial, it can happen a couple different ways. One, we can get the private streets with the multifamily development or a commercial development. And it could be just a commercial drive out, or in some cases I've been part of where someone may not have access to a street, but they want to name an existing drive aisle and name it a private street and then convert that to a private street so that they can get a physical address for their business because they're off the beaten path and they're not seen from the street. So they want to make sure there's a street sign where people can get to them. And so this code does that. It allows the process to get it with a gated community and infill a PUD, or with a multifamily development, commercial development, and then also rename existing or convert existing drive aisles to private streets, or basically name them for emergency services purposes. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. I know council had some reservations with opening the crack a little bit wider, just because of, again, cost of maintenance to those doing that. I don't see that being much of a burden for multifamily development and commercial, because again, it's probably these smaller infills and how do they tackle that. But again, that's CC&Rs and dues, and we haven't seen a lot of it, to be honest with you. Most of the time, people just do common driveways and do the 4 lots and they move on. But again, we'll see how this shakes out, see what council wants to do with it, but certainly happy to answer any questions about this topic.
I know this commission has not been a fan of the private streets and subdivisions because of just the congestion of utilities, where you allow 4 houses on this little spur, and the last guy, has to walk, or, emergency services or utility services, can't get in there without having to back up for garbage or any other kind of types of things. So it looks like that allowed use will continue, but it seems to me when you're dealing with a blank slate and creating a subdivision, and you're allowed to have these private streets or these, offsets, it's like, you shouldn't have to, because you've got a blank slate to be able to do it. But I'm not sure, we don't see how the neighbors all react years later to those types of things. But we'll see what city council has to say. What, any other comments from commission in regard to private streets? Okay. Is that our last subject?
That's the last item that I wanted to touch on. So if you want to open it up to public testimony, you certainly can.
Okay. Commissioners, do we have any questions from Bill or Caleb before we open public testimony? Okay. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody scheduled to testify?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have Will Good.
Hi. If you could just state your name and address for the record, that'd be great.
Yes, Will Gooda with Adler Industrial, 8665 West Emerald Street in Boise, Idaho. Madam Chair, Commissioners, Councilwoman Perot, congrats. I didn't know you on council, but that's been a whole bunch of times tonight. People have called you Councilwoman, so. Thank you guys for staying so late. Thank you to staff for being open to feedback from the development community on these code updates. For the most part, I'm supportive of everything. There's just one item with flex use that I wanted to touch on. And where this really matters is in mixed employment and the edge of CG zones where you're up against other industrial. And appreciate, Caleb, your definition, the definition you gave of what flex use is. I guess how we view it, and Adler Industrial, we're the largest industrial developer in the Valley. We own 20 plus buildings in Meridian, and we've got 5 more under construction right now. How we view flex industrial is exactly like you described it, Madam Chair. It tends to be small industrial users, often with some sort of a public-facing retail component that they want to be able to, they make cabinets and they want to be able to sell their cabinets in the front and then actually distribute out of the back, or stone. We find a lot of the demand is around the building materials or construction supply type uses, where they want a public-facing component, but they also need some warehouse and distribution in the back. So to give you our perspective on this, I wanted to compare 2 developments. We recently, we're just about to finish 2 flex concrete tilt buildings on the north side of 10 Mile Crossing. They're just south of the Tesla building, and these 2 36,000 square foot buildings are designed to demise down to 6,000 to 12,000 square foot spaces, which is a small industrial user. That's like, you've grown out of your garage in your house and you want 6,000 square feet. You're going next level. Those buildings are just about complete and we have 0 leases signed. We have tons of interest. I'll tell you why we have no leases signed in a little while. Comparing that with a building we have in Boise, similar building, designed for 6,000 to 12,000 square foot users. We just finished the shell there and it's 60% leased. And those last 2 spaces are probably going to be leased in the next 60 days. We have agreed LOIs on both of them. The difference is we get more inquiries on the Meridian buildings, and then we tell them that to be able to go on this in this location, you have to do 30% office. And that drives up their lease rate to a point where they can't afford it anymore. And they say, oh, I love the location. I can't go here, but what else do you have? And you either have to do 30% lease rate or apply for a conditional use permit to be able to qualify as warehouse. So that's why this is near and dear to our hearts, because I understand that we don't want warehouse in the mixed employment or the CG zones. Warehouse is 3 to 7% office. So we're well above warehouse. But I do think that I don't think anyone here just wants vacant buildings that can't be leased because they're not actually meeting a need in the market. And that's right now kind of what we have. This flex use is overly strict. It's moving in the right direction, and I appreciate that. In the letter we sent, and sorry, I'm taking too much time here. The letter we sent, we proposed 15% office and showroom in the mixed employment zone, and then 20% in the CG zone as you step from commercial to mixed employment to industrial, which is what really that mixed employment zone is designed for. And I got a little bit overly excited with data and graphs in what I presented just based on our portfolio. But that would at least allow us to appeal to, you know, 50% plus of flex tenants that are out there, and hopefully get these buildings leased up. So thank you. Sorry, I took too much time.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, no one else has signed up.
Anybody else in chambers?
Madam Chair, Commission members, Mike Wardle, Brighton Corporation, 2929 West Navigator, Meridian 83642. Our particular interest really is on the private street standards, and as Bill noted, it wasn't on the staff's radar particularly, but we found through our age-qualified projects and some infill that we've been doing that there's been some challenges with the way that the code, sometimes it is interpretation, but still there were some issues that we brought forward to staff. And then over the course of many months, there's been a lot of participation with staff as well as other community members on these standards, along with the others that they brought forward. So through that participation, we are pleased with the outcome that is before you, and we encourage your recommendation for the Planning Commission to recommend approval to the City Council. And I would just note one item. We're talking private streets, not common driveways, which was your concern, Madam Chair. But I would also note, and it's been a standard before, but it's reiterated in the proposed new standards that staff has recommended. It's 3F4A8 says comply with the ACHD structural standards for streets as shown on design and construction documents prepared and certified by a registered professional engineer. And in all of our projects that we've done, you're probably acquainted with our Cadence product. We have 3 communities in place and another that will be in front of you soon. We've always designed those and constructed those to ACHD standards as though it was going to be their street, period. We've never done anything less than that. So we support what staff has brought forth and presented to you, and encourage you to pass on that affirmative recommendation.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else in chambers? Hi. You can state your name and address for the record. That'd be great.
My name is Tom LeClaire. I live at 1923 East Pratt in Meridian, and I'm a member of the Meridian Transportation Commission.
Okay.
We received a transmission from ACHD in May, and it was a drive-through business. You probably saw it too. But the ACHD required them to attach a queuing analysis, an engineering stamp, and they asked our group if the city was planning to set standards for drive-through businesses, and we were told DC Group's working on it. So as I read through these, though, I don't know if it needs to say that, but it might be something to think about. Is if our standard is not met, should there be some kind of language referring to a queuing analysis may be required by ACHD, where they want us to have a standard, and yet they're really the ones that would implement such a standard. And so I guess that's the concern I have about this is there a gap in there between what the city's going to require and what ACHD may do based on what we require? And so that's just some feedback to this process, and I didn't want to I don't know how I'd vote if I was in your shoes, honestly. But it gives me some pause to wonder, does the city need these standards? Is this something ACHD is going to do on a case-by-case basis anyway? And so those are some thoughts, and maybe staff can provide thoughts to those questions. So that's all I had, and I just wanted to share those concerns with your group and wish you well in considering this ordinance.
All right, thank you very much.
Madam Chair, members of the
Madam
commission.
Clerk, is that it for public testimony, including online?
Yes, Madam Chair, that is it.
Okay. You have some comments from you?
Yeah, I'm happy to address the public testimony that we got, because it was a topic of discussion with the UDC focus group. And we did the same thing. We went, I'm sure you had ACHD staff come and say, yep, we require it, but it's not all the time, or it's only in certain circumstances. So they couldn't tell you when it was required or when it wasn't. And so in my experience in working with the UDC focus group and the industry expert that does drive-throughs throughout the country, we landed on saying provide a queuing exhibit like you see in number 7. Certainly, I am not a queuing analysis expert or a transportation expert, but I know that I've seen a few queuing analyses. Wow, that's a mouthful. And the reason why it was required by ACHD was because they were concerned the vehicles were going to stack on the adjacent roadways, the public right of way. So they use their professional judgment and then say, yeah, we need you to provide this to make sure, show us how it works, just like a traffic study. So we couldn't really come up with a standard to say when a queuing analysis would be required and when it wouldn't be. And so the gentleman and I that crafted this language, we agreed that that queuing exhibit made a lot more sense, because then you can see the number of vehicles that can fit in those stacking lanes and determine whether or not it can meet the requirements. And then I took it one step further and said, well, we're not going to allow you to count Toyota Priuses as your length. We're going to require a minimum vehicle length. And that's where I came up with 20 feet. So if you go up above, it says for tier, for stacking lanes, we're looking at tier 2 or number 6 there. It says 6 vehicles for tier 2. So you're looking at a minimum of 2 drive-through stacking lanes at 240 feet. Again, that won't address the in and outs of the world or the Chick-fil-A's at busy times, but it will allow a lot of stacking to occur on the property, more than what you would see and that's why we put some thought into breaking them out into the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, because we know not all of them are alike. So again, this took some of what I learned from my experiences looking at other code and then making it work for Meridian. So this does go above and beyond some of the codes that I've seen out there as well. So I won't profess that it's perfect. I think ACHD will still have that right to ask for that queuing analysis on a case-by-case basis. And again, the city does transmit its applications to them. So whether it's in front of you or us transmitting it to them through our certificate of zoning compliance process, they get a copy of the application and have access to the plans. And if they want those, ask for that information, the applicant will work with ACHD and provide that information as part of the application.
Well, I also like that the fact that if they don't fit into tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, and if it is, a completely different animal compared to what fits in those 3 categories, they still have the ability to come to council to have a conditional use permit and variances. So you're right, it may not check all the boxes, but at least there's 3 standard mechanisms and also a flexible mechanism in place to be able to accommodate whatever kind of growth might come next. And I would imagine with any kind of UDC text amendment, if it's not working for the city, we could also amend again as our city continues to change and grow. So, okay. Any other comments in regard to, well, Mr. Warder complimented the private streets, so I think we've kind of hit the mark on that one. Any other comments in regard to flex use?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in having more flexibility in that area. I don't know the definition as opposed to less. Hearing from the industry, I think that that gives us a handle on some of that as opposed to, I have no idea what, who and why somebody would occupy a building like that, but obviously the builders know far better than we do. So having a little more flexibility in the definition, I think would help.
So would you support less than 30% showroom space, and as far as what the city is asking for right now, as far as the percentages of use?
Yes. Just because I think that's gives the developer a little more opportunity. And of course, the more buildings get occupied, the more tax base for the city.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Smith?
I guess where I stand on that, it's a question of, we heard about, warehouse space, office space is maybe up to 7%. I guess my question then is, what about that gap of 7 to 20%, 7 to 25, 7 to 29 under the existing code? I think in the letter the request was for 10%. I don't know that anyone's necessarily aiming for that small of a gap, but I'm curious of, say if you're at 12% office space, where does that land you? Does that still keep you in warehouse? And is there at least a space for that?
So Madam Chair, I'm not sure that I can totally answer that question without having like a specific plan in front of me. I'll just try to answer it a little bit, but on the fringes. Just back to my comment about we want flexibility too. We're not trying to be so rigid and strict in some of these things, but again, in the commercial districts, even the CG zones that are on the fringe and may butt up, trying to protect some of those jobs even. It's not just even about the tax base, it's about the jobs that we may be losing out on if the square footage, the proportion of jobs to, in a retailer square foot versus a warehouse square foot is less. And so there's some of those components that even play into this, but I guess my comment was going to be to somewhat answer your question. Flexibility and even things like the lavatories and hallways and things like that. Like we're usually pretty generous in counting those towards your non-warehouse square footages. Building code comes into play at some point too, and what type of occupancy you need as well. So it's a little more complex than 7 or 12%. It kind of depends on how things are demised and separated and the type of occupancy you need in some areas. So this is pretty high level planning code. Building code comes into play at some point too. And yeah, I'm sorry, I can't fully answer that.
That's fine. I guess my question is there, regardless of the specific use or specific plan or what is constituted as non-warehouse use, if I am in that gap, I guess what is the plan? It sounds like from some of the public testimony that really the answer is CUP. But is that basically the only output if you're in that gap between that 7 for warehouse and 30 for flex? That seems like a big space, and so I guess I'm just curious, like what is the way that they can have some non-super burdensome?
A CUP may be the way, and I'll just say it, the CUP is not super burdensome. It is a process, and it does take some time and some money and some expense. I'm not trying to totally downplay that, but in a situation like that, that may be appropriate. I mean, having to go through a public hearing for something that's marginal at best, in my opinion, may be the best way forward. At least you get your day in court, right? You can make a case for it, at least. Again, I think there's a lot that goes into that. So depending on what these gap projects or gap scenarios or whatever you want to call them, I'd really like to see if we can get there. So again, what does the building even look like? How can we work with developers on some of these things to make it fit. That's really what it is about fit here. It's not even, to me, it's not so much about the percentage of the floor space. It's what are you doing in the building? The example I mentioned before, they have corporate offices, but it's not as big as their retail or their, we could call them whatever, they had options, right? We could call them offices, we could call them retail, we could call them flex. What's in their best interest? What's in the city's best? How's the building fit on the property in that specific situation? Yes, there's some code. The flex space is really meant to have a caveat to say, okay, to differentiate you from a warehouse, you need to have some of this, or else you are just a warehouse. If you're 7%, sorry, you're a warehouse. You know, that's kind of where I'm at. Like even 8%, I'm like, that's a pretty small percentage. If there's another number, I mean, again, I'm open to some of that, but that's what we're trying to protect against again. So I do appreciate, I'll just say, well, that, you know, everyone stayed this late and for the comments and the letters and the feedback. So do appreciate that, but it could be tough. We'll work with them. At the end of the day, it may be a CUP, maybe no. It may be, yeah, you got to go to another community. Quite honestly, again, we're trying to protect some jobs, the integrity of the future buildings, potentially.
Previous to this revision, in regard to flex space, with the percentages of 30% being front of the house and the rest being back of the house, has that always been the consistent number, or was it higher before? In flex space?
Bill might be able to, I'm not aware of us changing it ever. I think this has been the standard.
30% has been our standard in our city for quite a while, so there's really no change there.
Again, I thought was being helpful in opening it up a little bit more to say, okay, yeah, let's have a lesser percent in some of these other zones. It's just been 30% in all zones to qualify as flex.
Got
We're like, okay, in some
So
of
it
these,
really is no change in that language at all. But I mean, I understand from a developer standpoint or a owner like Adler who wants to be able to create more marketing opportunities to be able to sell their space by saying, you don't have to have 30%, maybe it's 20% front of the house and then, you know, whatever else is, and you still can be in that flex space. But what you're telling me is that 30%'s been the standard for quite a while. It's not, that part hasn't changed.
absolutely for quite a while. I don't know. I'm not going to say 20 years, but
No, I know.
as far as I know, it's been
Quite a
20
while.
years. I don't remember us changing it.
Okay.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, it's funny you bring that up because Adler, although it wasn't Adler at the time, was at the table when we came up with the flex space standards. We worked with Brad Miller. He sat on there, and I know even at that time, he thought 30 was high. But again, as Caleb mentioned, it really is a quasi-industrial use. So we're skirting that line between a commercial versus industrial, and that's why we call it flex space. I don't think Boise even has a flex space definition in their code if I'm not. So they just like, yeah, if it's allowed in the district, you kind of go in there and you're this use. So although I think we're trying to create flexibility here, sometimes it does confuse our applicants as to what that really means. And that's, I think Caleb's trying to do his best, or staff's trying to do our best to say, we want to be flexible. We hear you. But at the same time, we don't want to go so far that now we've created a industrial use in a CG zone or a commercial district. It really, for staff, or at least my experience and planning, current planning, is everything we do is about compatibility, the context, what is developed around it. The example Will gave with the 10-mile crossing property, he's part of a large mixed-use commercial development. His buildings blend in. So to me, in that situation, if code were different, I would say I am good with something more industrial in nature because it was part of, it's around storage. It blends in, it's part of that. It could fit in that situation. But like you said, if this was a flex space next to a residential district or an infill piece, maybe it doesn't work. So to me, I think what we can do, at least if you guys want to change the standards or recommend a change, that's certainly within your purview tonight to have council take that into consideration. But I would like the opportunity to maybe work as we transition to city council on getting with these industry experts and maybe coming up, not necessarily a CUP, but maybe coming up with a standard that allows the director to deviate a certain percentage when somebody can demonstrate that it fits in with the character. Or I don't know what that threshold is. I'm just talking spitballing ideas. But some codes out there do give the director latitude to make those determinations, to say, hey, we're willing to let you do 20% in the CG zone if you can demonstrate these things, or the 15% in the IL. Give you that 5% deviation in the office if you can show us how you maintain the jobs, or whatever the threshold may be, through how the business operates. Because to me, that's all, like Caleb said, there's so many variables to this.
Right.
I can't sit here and say, give you the perfect scenario. It's just, it's impossible, because everything we do, it comes down to definitions and how we interpret the code and what that end use can be. Like Caleb says, we have a lot of flexibility. We just have to find where you best fit.
One of the things I appreciate about this commission and this process with the city, with planning and zoning being the first step and then city council being the second step, is that each application is addressed on its own merit by itself. And that the city, like what you have told us when we were trained, we want this commission to say yes, because the planners have done everything that we can to be able to make that box fit into that space. But as our city grows and there's pockets, there's going to be, you know, always certain circumstances. And what you're suggesting here for this UDC text amendment is the beginning of the discussion, the baseline of the conversation, right? And then, like you said, maybe having the director, or even through the CUP process, having that flexibility. It's like, you know, it does fit, but you know, this is our goal. But in your case, because you're right next to FedEx, you know, maybe this warehousing does comply with only 15% front and then, you know, the rest of the back. Because we treat each application individually. But I also understand that as a city, we have to have a code and a standard and a place to start, a minimum. And that's where the variances come in. So as we go through this process with the city council, and it'd be interesting to see what they say as far as flex space, maybe there's some language in there saying 30% is the standard. And, you know, with a little asterisk, on occasion, open for, you know, discussion type of thing. But the standard needs to be written. So,
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Smith.
I want to, first off, I want to thank you. I think we're asking a lot of questions tonight, which the answer is it depends. I think it's probably for lawyers and city staff, as far as I understand, are probably the most common words. But I think that's kind of where my head's at. I guess I don't know how this comports with the rest of code, but I wonder if there's some way to also, in the same way that there's the drive-throughs, there's kind of, here's the standard, and if not, it specifies in the code, it's a CUP. And I think maybe some of the question marks that I have, and maybe some applicants have, is that the alternative, or the alternative way to gain compliance is unclear here. So I think having that kind of director level decision maybe in the code, or even CUP as an outlet in the code, can be helpful. Because I also look at that and I think, well, is there something that maybe I need to go to council instead of CUP, and kind of outlining those a little more clearly. Again, a lot of it depends, but maybe having some more specificity there. So then when an applicant like Adler, instead of, hey, there's kind of this extra stuff you got to do, and then there's these other questions, instead it's, hey, here's a very clear thing that might take, here's the expected timeline, here's the expected cost, and you can factor that in, rather than it being kind of this scary unknown for a potential new tenant. So I don't, less of a question and more, I guess, I think that's the right path. And I think that's worth going down, the path worth going down.
We're still in public testimony, correct? Am I allowed to bring a, am I allowed to bring a, person back?
You certainly can.
Madam Chair, if they're coming up to rebut new information, then they can come back up. In your discretion.
I wouldn't call it rebut.
Oh,
In
we
the,
need to call it rebut.
okay, wait,
Go
if
ahead.
I am rebutting new information, I was responding to new
Okay,
information.
there you go.
We'll go to 8665 West Emerald Street, Boise, Idaho.
Thank you.
The CUPs, so when a tenant's faced with, should I lease here or should I lease here? And one option requires a CUP, which adds time, money, and uncertainty because CUPs are discretionary. They almost all the time will just choose the other option. And to your question earlier, the option for 12% is to go into an IL zone. In Boise, you have commercial and you have industrial butting up to each other. Meridian tried to create a mixed employment zone to ease the transition between commercial and industrial. And what we're trying to do is thread the needle of what does that transition look like. If you'll notice right now, if you look at your land use map, there's hardly any mixed employment land that's developed because it's not developable. Because warehouse isn't allowed, most things aren't allowed. Building materials isn't allowed. So flex is allowed, but of our 4 million square feet, 1.5% of it has greater than 30% office and showroom. We can't build a building to appeal to 1.5% of the market. I can't convince investors. I can't convince anyone to get behind that. So the CUP usually will just scare away a tenant. Unfortunately, I wish it didn't. And yeah, 12% means you just go to an IL zone, basically. So thank you for the.
Thank you. Okay. Did you have any other comments before we close the public hearing? No. Commissioners, any other questions before we close the public hearing? Can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second to close the public hearing on item number ZOA 2025-0001. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Well, this is a stacked deck, isn't it? I think all the changes that for this particular text amendment are in the best interest of the city. It defines things a little bit differently. And I'm talking about all of them, not anything in specific. For me personally, you know, I wrote down that the drive-throughs, if they don't fit the categories, they have the CUP. The ADUs for safety, for the primary structure, for addressing, all make sense. The flex space, the 30% is a good start, but it's sounding like the market is saying that they need less. So that's maybe a conversation that, you know, when it gets to city council, they can look at, but we need a standard, and it sounds like that's been the standard. Home occupation with the swimming, I think is a lovely idea. Consistency in fencing and the private streets, you know, all seem to make sense without a lot of controversy. I think as we continue with the industry and city council working with the flex space, I'm sure we can come up with some language that would be able to bridge developers in the city and what's in the best interest of both to be able to move our city forward. So I'm in favor of the things that are the way they are written right now.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Smith.
I think I tend to agree with you. It seems to me a lot of the flex spaces issues also kind of more targeted around that, you know, ILME kind of area where it might be 20%. Maybe it's not the 30% areas, the CCs, that it's the huge issue, but it's those more borderline cases. And maybe there's a case for rolling that 20% down to 15, but leaving everything else the same. I think there's maybe some discussion that, you know, staff can have before this gets to council, and some discussion at council about that. But I think really the question is the city of Meridian going to be seriously hurting if we get this wrong, in the sense of, you know, what'll hurt more if we get it wrong, in what direction? If we have the ratios too low, and then the anticipated kind of uses of the zoning kind of aren't aligned with what the plan is, I think that's more harmful than, you know, maybe we take a more temperamental, more of a slow and steady reduction to kind of try to thread the needle and find the right percentages there. So I think, yeah, I see the argument for a lower percent, and very well may get there at some point. But I don't know that it's an urgent enough case to do it right now, and that we need to jump at lowering the numbers. Maybe in 6 months, a year, 2 years, that ends up that's what it ends up at. But I think I'm okay with where staff's at now, especially with some sort of mechanism, especially at the director level, to help maybe limit some of the CUP concerns and some of the city council concerns. But even then, you know, having a more clear path for variance, I think will be helpful.
I have a comment. I'm on the other side of that, because I think the minute you add time or variable, people are reticent to invest their money and add time to their, because time is money for them. And especially if they're having to borrow money, or if he's looking for investors. Any developer is looking for that investor or that bank. And the longer things go, the more it costs. And so they're going to say, I'm going to go somewhere else. So I think if we're serious as a city to encouraging these types of businesses and having this flex zone, somehow we have to communicate that we're flexible. You know, you can't go down to 5%, but you know, if you're at 15 or 20, yeah, we're happy to look at it. So somehow in that way, I think we have to communicate that out. And obviously, if, you know, if we're competing against other municipalities, they're going to go elsewhere. And then we end up with raw land unused.
Commissioner Peru.
Going to somewhat land in the middle here. I really like Bill's idea about taking that time to sit down with our stakeholders and our commercial developers and fleshing that out more, seeing if we can come to a little bit more detail on that, and figuring out if there are some criteria that would allow those percentages to change up or down. Maybe we start talking minimums instead of maximums. I feel like that, I think that it would be better for us to have more information before the decision's made. And I'd like to see that happen before council if possible. I don't know what the time frame is, but I'll leave that to you all. But I think that would be really wise on our part, so that, not that staff doesn't already have a really good grasp on what's going on with commercial development, but just as that, you know, just the opportunity for the community to have a little bit more voice in it, and see if there is some way that we can, as far as, I understand what Commissioner Smith is saying. As far as like director level decisions, and there still has to be kind of a criteria that the director follows. So one way or the other, you're still developing some additional criteria that says, hey, we're going to agree to this, or we're not going to agree to that, whoever the decision maker is.
Right.
So
are you suggesting a continuance so that they come back with flex space, or do we vote a motion with a condition that that conversation happens before council?
If the commission wants staff to do that and come back before us and have another discussion, then yes, we would continue it.
Right.
If
Is that what you're suggesting?
No,
Oh.
no, I'm suggesting that staff have those conversations, hopefully before council.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's possible. I don't know what your time frame is.
Madam Chair, I mean, I certainly, I'm happy to talk to Will some more about it. We've talked about it and I understand where they're coming from. I mean, we can talk and if you want to change percentages, that's up to you. I'm trying to keep an open mind, but I don't see, yeah, this is already going that direction. If you want to make it 20, then that's a motion and you can make it 20. I don't know that me talking to Will anymore is going to be, again, I enjoy our conversations, but I don't know that either one of us are going to be convinced. So it's fine. I get his perspective. I think I understand everything. And if I'm in his shoes, I'm writing the same letter. I wear different shoes though, and I have a different perspective and you do as well. So if you want to change it, then you can make that motion, a continuance to talk about it some more. I'm afraid is not going to change staff's recommendation at this point. What I will commit to, irregardless of what you do and ultimately what the council does, we'll continue to monitor it and be back in 6 months, a year, 2, 3. I don't know how long, but we'll monitor it still. I'm not too worried about vacant land just sitting there. That hasn't been a problem for the last 20 years. I'm not saying we're trying to be, obstinate to development, but we want the right type of development. That's what this is really all about. If you want just development, why have zoning? Just get rid of all the zoning codes and let people go crazy. Okay. If that's what you want to do, make that part of your motion. And again, I can meet with Will and I will before we go to council. I don't know what that's going to gain anyone necessarily though.
Right.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Pearl.
I apologize. I got the impression that you hadn't had those conversations. You had mentioned something along the lines of maybe not having had as many conversations and with stakeholders, and I didn't know if it was about this specific issue or other issues in the code changes that are recommended.
So Madam Chair, maybe just a little bit of what's happened over the last couple of years. Will's not been part of our tighter UDC focus group, but for the last meeting, maybe 2. We've talked about it on and off though, through other interactions we have with developer stakeholder groups and other things. So we've had conversations over the time, over the last 6 months or more even, going back. So again, I'm trying to be open-minded and listen. I just can't take everything and just make those changes in good confidence with what I feel is in the best interest of the community. But that is my just professional opinion. I'll talk to him. We'll talk maybe even right after this meeting. I know it's getting late, but I'll definitely connect with him between now and council. I just don't know if that's gonna equate to any real change because I feel like we've been having some of those conversations and this is where we've landed. For now,
Right.
it's a change in the right direction. Is it all the way to there? Maybe, maybe not. We'll keep tracking it and can come back again if we need to change it more.
Madam Chair, I think that's to clarify, I think where I'm at, that's kind of my position. I'm thinking of this as, lowering the limit is like adding salt to a dish. Or you can always add a little bit more, you can always reduce it a little bit more. But it's really hard to, when you add too much salt, when you lower the limit too much,
Right.
there's that risk there. And so, I do think, those numbers maybe matter to the applicants and they matter to the developer. I think it's more of a question of how hard pressed the city is right now at this very second to get that ME zone or those specific zones developed. We want to see them used and developed and used, but I think it's a question of are we under the gun really trying to get them developed now? And that's a different conversation. I don't think that's where we're at. And so I think this is an opportunity for, if we still land high, we can come back around, I think to Caleb's point, and, try getting a little lower if that's still a need. I think, I think there's a risk here of mistaking a step in the right direction for a step in the wrong one, just because it's not a big enough step. And so I think this is good. I think this is really good. And again, I really do like to, Commissioner Pro, to your point about having some standard. I do like kind of, Bill, maybe an offhand idea, but I think a good one of having that, again, specifically a 5% discretion. I think that might help cover a lot of the ground. I know some of the letters asked for 5% lower. And so if we can say, hey, it is 5% lower if you can do these things, and there's that director discretion, I think there's helpful there. I don't know if that's something that gets workshopped a little bit and brought before council. I don't know if we make a motion tonight to leave that up to the rest of the commission. I don't know if that's baked enough for that, but I think that's the direction that makes more sense to go. rather than dropping it and trying to drop it now, or make, a big drastic change to it.
Well, knowing that city council is going to be very aware of our conversation about flex space, and it's probably going to be presented again at council as well. I don't see us being the governing body to make that change here. The 30%, can stay. And in the meantime, stakeholders in the city can continue to talk. And then when it goes to council, it will come up again. And if the city feels at this point in time that it's in the best interest of the city to change that standard, then that's when it will come. So with that in mind, after considering all staff, applicant, and public testimony, I recommend to approve file number ZOA 2025-001 as presented in the staff report of the hearing date of June 26, 2025 to City Council.
Second.
It's been moved and second to approve the UDC text amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed?
City Clerk, Madam Clerk, you can note the denial. And it is still 3-1, so motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do we need to do anything with the other document reports that were listed on the agenda? Then I will take one more motion.
Yes.
Yes? We do want to talk about the document report? Okay. Or department, not documents. I can't even read my own handwriting. Department reports. Thank you for coming.
Members of the commission, this is, as previously noted, an information item only. P and Z makes formal recommendations to City Council on Title 11. This is Title 8. However, P and Z does make on occasion decisions regarding Title 8 addressings, and we still would like to have your input if you have any on it to share with City Council.
Okay.
I will keep this brief, but since I don't get to talk about addressing to you very often, it's usually the comp plan or something else. I thought I would just give you a little recap of what it is, especially for the newer commissioners. Our addressing technicians do code compliance, participate in interagency reviews, and there's a great deal of technical workflows, not just within the city, but multiple agencies. We have an interagency data sharing system called ACX, for which Ada County leads, and Boise and Meridian are part of. Sorry, wrong slide. This is just a simple infographic sort of showing where our addressing data goes, sort of what I just mentioned, and then you'll know it goes to Esri, Google Maps, a whole lot of different services and systems. So it's used in a lot of things. Basically, every permit through the city. Finance uses it for billing, addressing. There's a lot of behind the scene work there. It's also much more complex than this. Ada County has an extensive number of workflows that are far more advanced than this. On the city side, we have our own workflows. It's also multiple database systems talking to each other and working back and forth. Not trying to oversell it, it's just very complex and there's a lot of review that goes into it. Back to the purpose of the update tonight, you all have a detailed memo in your packet. I'm not going to go over those in great depth, but I will sort of cover high level what those topics are. And then if you have any specific areas you want to discuss, I'd love to do that with you. This first topic area, as Caleb mentioned earlier, relates to Title 11 UDC changes and specifically accessory dwelling units. Both changes in Title 8 and Title 11 are intended to align with building code as a sort of cornerstone or anchor. High level, we're adding in some very broad definitions for single, multi, and accessory dwellings. A few cleanup changes as a result of those definitions. And then sort of defining, and this is the important part, when an ADU gets addressed. This is a little complex for me, so I'm just going to sort of explain it the way I was told and understood it. Apologize for that. Lots of things by definition, you know, even in Title 11 are an ADU. Then there's the standards in Title 11 or Title 10 building code, the standards. So you can be an ADU, but you can be an illegal ADU, just like you can be an ADU that meets all of our standards. The big change here is in order to get an address, and if you meet those standards, you will get an address, whether you decide to use it or not. And if you do not meet those standards, if you're, quote, an illegal ADU, you will not get an address. The reason for that is some direction basically that the city was told to go after, I'm gonna get it right. Well, we were basically told to go that way. So there's a judge involved, and there were some comments earlier about some news a couple years ago. The second round of changes are consistency and cleanup for the most part. They generally involve multi-unit residential or suites, so apartments or suites. The first big change is to basically decide that we're not going to follow a system previously where buildings were addressed based off whether they are under single or common ownership in an apartment complex. The Postal Service does not like doing that anymore. They've asked us not to do that. What that means is we're not going to give buildings letter identifiers anymore. So you're not building A, not building B, each with their own apartments in them. It's now each one of those buildings has their own address. This is actually helpful for the city as well because we don't determine when a property might be subdivided later on. And if it is subdivided, then each one of those buildings has to then be re-addressed, which is a nightmare. So we've already been doing this, but it reflects sort of direction from USPS. The second one, there are 4 suites. This area is one where we have a lot of direction from a number of different systems, including NENA or the 911 Association, Fire and Building Code, again, USPS, others. They don't provide a lot of direction on how we should address suites or apartments for that matter, except that we want to be consistent in how we do it. We haven't always been super consistent in a few areas. We've lost institutional knowledge, things have changed. But some of the things that we have been consistent on, we're now codifying so that there's less external pressure of telling us, you know, what someone wants to do rather than what we need to do for 911 emergency purposes. And then there's some other ones where we recognize we haven't been doing them great. Apartment numbers, for example, and what I call pinwheel, so external access, single floor sort of units, not walk-up garden style or mid-rise internal hallway sort of apartments. Standardizing how we do those and making it more consistent with everything else we're doing. That's really high level. I'm happy to dive into any of the specific code changes if you want. If it's something you just want us to share with council, I'm happy to do that. I will note we also added some diagrams just to help people understand some of the common things we see and are asked about. Yeah, I'll stand for any questions.
The only question I have is that everything is going forward, or are you gonna retro any of this stuff? Like, well, specifically with like the ADUs, you know, is it only new applications that come through, or have you identified if somebody changed their, you know, put in a unit in the backyard and it was illegal and now it's going to be legal because code enforcement asked them to go through the process? You know, are you searching them out, or are you just waiting for them to come to you as they're identified as we go forward?
Commission President, that's a great question. This is primarily intended for moving forward. However, we will be working to go back through our enterprise system and find previously approved ADUs that meet those standards and add them to the system and add addresses if they don't already have them. And then we will modify it as we become aware of issues, but we're not going to do a complete overhaul and trying to figure out where all the legal ones are or whether they approve or could be approved or.
Right. And same with apartment buildings. So no more letters, but the ones that already have them will still be identified that as.
Correct. We're not going to upend everyone's lives. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That was all. Any comments from you? There's nothing to really approve, but thank you for sharing. So I think it seems very straightforward and cleaning up changes and making life easier for the post office and the city seems to make a lot of sense. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, I'll take one more motion.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Smith,
move to adjourn.
it's been moved and second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Our next meeting is not the first week of July.